Chapter 726, Project Dark Swallow. Chapter 726, Project Dark Swallow. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. On the 48th year of the Spirit Inception era, war had broken out between the Tao Palace and the Federation. 5 months later, the war had ended. The Tao Palace cultivators, led by Liezi, had chosen to surrender. It had been a brief war, but one that had been intense and with a high casualty count. Its end had been viewed as a mystery by almost everyone. That was because no one had witnessed the most decisive battle. It had remained a mystery that had fueled many rumors regarding how the war had truly ended. Rumors spread from person to person. During this period, the post-war cleanup and rebuilding efforts continued non-stop. The first on the agenda was what to do with the Tao Palace cultivators who had surrendered. 30% of the surviving cultivators were judged to have committed grievous crimes. Their sentence was declared forcefully by Duan Muke and broadcast to the entire Federation. They were to be executed. It was a harsh sentence, but the people of the Federation needed this. There was no way they could allow those who had invaded Federation territory to surrender without suffering any consequences. Duan Muke was willing to bear the consequence of allowing such a massacre to happen. In addition, almost all of the Tao Palace's upper echelons were planted with a spirit science hex, a product of Zhao Pinfang's research. They were no longer a threat to the Federation. They were also given a 500-year sentence. They would be released from their hexes 500 years later, once they completed their sentence. Liez's status and circumstance made him an exceptional case. While the Federation hesitated over his final sentence, he chose to make an oath and return to the Tao Palace. He would guard the Tao Palace for the rest of his life. Unless the Federation summoned him, he wouldn't take a single step out of the Tao Palace. As part of the war reparations, the Tao Palace would grant the Federation full access to their resources. That included access to all their records and mystic techniques. The Federation would also possess unilateral rights to enter and leave the Tao Palace. Federation cultivators could now enter and leave the ancient sword freely. Of course, under Feng Churan's insistence, the deepest regions of the ancient sword were designated as restricted zones. Federation cultivators were forbidden from entering the area and disturbing the slumber of the Tao Palace elders. Next, Wang Baoli's proposal to form an alliance prior to the outbreak of the war was raised again. Duan Muke gave it the full attention it deserved, summoning the upper echelons of the Federation as well as Feng Churan to discuss the matter. Both parties made minor modifications to the original proposal and agreed to the setup of the alliance. In the 49th year of the Spirit Inception era, the Solar System Alliance was established. Its creation heralded a new era, the Solar Era. There were currently 2 members in the Solar System Alliance, the Federation Civilization and the vast expanse Tao Palace. Alliance regulations stated that the Federation Civilization was the only member to possess a long-standing, first-tier membership status in the Alliance. It had the power to change or veto decisions of the Alliance. The vast expanse Tao Palace, on the other hand, held a second-tier membership. These rules clearly gave the Federation a great advantage over the Tao Palace. The latter would never have agreed to such terms in the past. Even though Feng Churan had always had the intention to build an alliance with the Federation, she would have pushed for the Tao Palace to be the leader of the alliance. However, the war and the power that the Federation had displayed during this war had changed her mind. Both Feng Churan and the Tao Palace began to view the Federation with greater respect, and they recognized its power. The key reason for their change was still Wang Baoli. His power and his final mysterious battle with Daoist Yuran had resulted in Feng Churan's agreement to the terms of the alliance. It didn't matter that no one had witnessed the final battle. The honeymoon period between the Tao Palace and the Federation officially began with the alliance's establishment. Communications and exchanges between the two took place with unprecedented frequency. The wealth of knowledge and mystic techniques the Tao Palace possessed were invaluable to the Federation. Spirit science development in the Federation progressed rapidly during this period of exchange. The Tao Palace stood to gain as well. Extension of the Federation's infrastructure, such as the Spirit Internet, as well as provisions of daily supplies, were a great help to the Tao Palace cultivators. As the immigration laws between the two grew more liberal, many Tao Palace cultivators and Federation cultivators on Earth chose to immigrate. Rebuilding efforts in the alliance were ongoing as well. With the Tao Palace's support, rebuilding efforts on Mars progressed smoothly. Deep excavations on Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune were successes with the combined efforts of the Tao Palace and the Federation. They became the first bases of the alliance. To a certain extent, they could even be considered as the first free cities of the alliance. There was Jupiter as well. After some deliberation, the Tao Palace decided not to bring the matter of the planet up. The Federation, on the other hand, utilized their first-tier membership status to classify Jupiter and its surrounding asteroid belt as a restricted zone. Few understood the strategic value of that decision. Not Li Xingwen, Du and Muke, and the other upper echelons of the Federation though, who had sought Wang Baoli's advice and understood the situation. They were prepared to cordon the region and create a place that belonged solely to Wang Baoli. The alliance overflowed with life and opportunity. The smooth assimilation between the Tao Palace and the Federation allowed many great things to be done. Civilization advanced without stop. At the same time, Wang Baoli received the Federation's recognition. He had not only become their hero, but everyone, from the citizen on the ground to the upper echelons of the Federation, and even the Tao Palace, knew very well that he was going to be the next Federation president. He was going to hold the highest office in the Solar System Alliance. That wasn't going to happen anytime soon because the Federation and the Tao Palace had just begun their assimilation and alliance. There was still a great deal of work to be done. They had to rebuild, to set up laws and rules. They needed to decide how to divide profits. There were so many tedious details to be ironed out. Most importantly, Du and Muke didn't want Wang Baoli to have to deal with such a chaotic situation immediately when the latter got into office. He wanted to get all the grunt work done. He intended to untangle the political chaos in the Federation, which was caused by the presence of the various political entities. He intended to amputate the malignant tumor hidden in the Federation. He was going to exploit the authority and power he had gained from the war and consolidate all power in the hands of the presidency. Then, he would hand over a brand new Federation to Wang Baoli, one free from troubles and burdens. Wang Baoli couldn't wait to be made president. However, he also understood Du and Muke's good intentions. After gaining consciousness from his battle with Daoist Yuran, he returned to Earth. He spent his time with his parents, enjoying an ordinary person's life while burying the unresolved matter that had risen inside him after his battle with Daoist Yuran. He put it to rest silently, unwilling to touch the matter again. He told himself to be happy. As he kept brainwashing himself quietly, he seemed to slowly forget about the existence of this unresolved matter. He began to look forward gleefully to the announcement declaring him as the Federation president. Wang Baoli's life with his parents became peaceful and calm. Besides staying by his parents' side, what Wang Baoli enjoyed doing the most was leading his donkey out secretly. It was then that he would eavesdrop on conversations, listen in on heated, passionate voices, and watch the looks of adoration on the speakers' faces as they discussed him. He even put up the occasional pretense of being a wolf in sheepskin. He would pretend to be bullied, then reveal his powerful self at the end and observe the shocked expressions on everyone's faces. The experience brightened his mood every time. But after doing that too many times, his donkey grew tired of it. He himself found it meaningless as well. After some thought, he began protesting his singlehood in his mother's presence. Soon, his mother began setting up matchmaking sessions for him. His mother knew how amazing his son had become. However, no matter what, Wang Baoli would always remain a child in her eyes. As she went through her selection of candidates, Wang Baoli began bringing his donkey to session after session of matchmaking. The experience became a new source of fun for Wang Baoli. Then, Bunny arrived. Wang Baoli could only end the matchmaking. Still, he enjoyed his time with Bunny. The academic exploration they conducted with each other was extremely enjoyable. This didn't last long. However, Li Wanna arrived next. The feelings of happiness that Wang Baoli had been experienced shifted immediately to that of absolute terror. Wang Baoli's head began to throb. Time crawled as 3 months passed. The alliance was running along smoothly, and rebuilding efforts were nearing completion. After spending a great deal of effort, Du and Muke finally got the Federation into shape. Everything was pointing to a new beginning. Wang Baoli was sitting on his hands, waiting in excitement. It was then that many of Wang Baoli's friends, Zhao Yameng, Liu Daobin, Li Wuchen, Jin Duoming, Lin Qianhao, and Kong Dao, came knocking on his door and bid him farewell. They didn't share any details of their departure, they only informed him that they were off to carry out a secret mission. The duration of this mission might be short or very long. Zhao Yameng had originally not been part of the mission. She was the daughter of the Martian colony governor and Zhao Pinfang, so she had a bright and stable future in the Federation and in the Alliance. However, she had chosen to join the mission of her own accord. No one knew why she had done so. Her tone had been cold when she had said farewell to Wang Baoli. She had even glared at him fiercely before her departure. The intense hostility in her eyes had made Wang Baoli shiver with guilt. He had quickly made use of his access rights to find out the details of their mission. There was nothing he wasn't allowed to know in the entire Federation. A quick search left him looking somber. Their mission was highly classified, with only 4 people allowed to access the mission details. They were Li Xingwen, Duan Muke, Zhao Pinfang, and Wang Baoli. The mission was a continuation of the 100 Seedling Plan and the Federation's plans involving the Dao Palace. It had been drawn up many years ago. It had been given a name. Dark Swallow. Chapter 727, Senior Brother Arrives. Chapter 727, Senior Brother Arrives. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Dark Swallow. The expression on Wang Baoli's face was serious. His mood turned dark after he read the full details of the mission. Dark Swallow was essentially an espionage mission. However, they weren't conducting the mission in the Federation or in the Dao Palace. They were going to venture out into the unknown universe. Many years ago, at the beginning of the Spirit Inception era, through certain unique means, the Federation came to know of the existence of multiple civilizations around the solar system. They had done so with the talisman that Li Xingwen had revealed to Wang Baoli, the core of the solar system array formation. They had also relied on ancient ruins found on Earth for clues. In fact, Wang Baoli had read the information about Project Dark Swallow and found records about Lin Qianhao's father, Lin Yu. The records clearly documented Lin Yu's disappearance at one of those ruins when he had been a young man. He had reappeared at the exact spot of disappearance a year later. His report stated that he had been transported to another civilization, and had brought back some basic information about other civilizations in the universe. Another name had sent Wang Baoli reeling back in shock. It was Xie Haiyang's name. The record spoke of Xie Haiyang's mysterious behavior, highlighting especially his disappearance during his time in the ethereal Dao College and his reappearance in the Dao Palace. The Federation had thought this had something to do with the Dao Palace. However, they hadn't been able to investigate the matter further due to their relationship with the latter then. After the war ended, the Federation had reinitiated investigations on this matter. Xie Haiyang's true origins came under the Federation's scrutiny. The game that he had collaborated with Wang Baoli on also became part of the investigation's focus. If not for Wang Baoli's unique position in the Federation, which spared him from any suspicion and doubt, he himself would have become a target of this secret investigation as well. No conclusive findings had resulted from the investigation. Regardless, the team had presented their assessment of the matter. They believed that Xie Haiyang had come from a greater and more advanced civilization for training in the Federation. There had been others who had also been the target of this secret investigation. Wang Baoli found more than 100 names. They came from various fields and backgrounds. But 2 commonalities united them. They had either vanished and reappeared like Lin Yu had, or various signs and clues had pointed to their not being from the Federation. Zhui Yifun's and Zhui Yixian's names were also in the report. Based on the investigation's findings, they seemed to have been transported out of the solar system via some mysterious power. The accumulation of these bizarre occurrences had forced the Federation to give them due attention. That had been the reason for the continuation of the Federation's 100 Seedling Plan and the alliance with the Dao Palace, which had come in the form of Project Dark Swallow. The objective of this project was to identify individuals with certain unique skill sets and whom the Federation could trust, then send them out of the solar system. Their objective would be to search for other civilizations beyond the solar system. The means for their travel was similar to Lin Yu's. The records stated that over the years, the investigation team had located 43 locations that they suspected were teleportation portals. Due to the risks involved, they hadn't dared to try and initiate any teleportations. As a result, the Federation had no knowledge of the teleportation capabilities of these portals. The participants of Project Dark Swallow were to act as scouts for information. Should their teleportation succeed, they should strive for the ideal scenario, to infiltrate the extraterrestrial civilizations successfully. Else, they were to ensure their own safety, then do their best to collect as much information as possible, so that the Federation was provided with as comprehensive a picture of the surrounding civilizations as possible. This plan had been drawn up based on the facts the Federation had on hand. Most of the people who had disappeared via these teleportation portals had never returned. A few, though, had made their way back. Sometimes, after a few months, and sometimes, after years. This plan should have been extremely challenging for the Federation to execute on its own. The participants' safety rested on their possession of various mystic techniques or artifacts that allowed them to hide themselves, or change their forms to blend in. They also needed to be able to communicate with any foreign life forms and possess a certain level of cultivation. With the Tao Palace as a new member of this project, all problems had been resolved easily. Prior to their addition, the Federation had been in the middle of building artifacts that could conceal or change one's appearance. With the Tao Palace in the picture, Zhao Pinfang had been able to complete the construction of these artifacts easily. In addition, the Tao Palace had also provided a solution regarding the challenge of communicating with alien life forms. The project had been reinitiated. It might seem a hasty move, but on the contrary, the Federation had begun preparations for this project many years ago. Wang Baoli stared at the records he had just read and fell silent. He had half a mind to stop Zhao Yaming and his friends and get them to abort their missions. But he didn't know how to convince them and where to start. The Federation made the right move. They needed to find out about the universe that rested beyond their borders. They desperately needed to understand what was going on in the star systems surrounding them. This would allow them to be more prepared for their next contact with an alien civilization, regardless if they were friendly or hostile. This would prevent the war with the Tao Palace from repeating itself. They wouldn't have to face similar despair. This was a civilization trying to progress. It wasn't something he alone could accomplish. This required the efforts of countless people. As a civilization started its path towards greater progress, many people would have to contribute their own talents, as well as unleash and showcase their potential to the world. Even though this project seemed highly dangerous, Wang Baoli did note from the files how the Federation had given lavish resources to everyone who was participating in the project. Each person had been given more than a dozen second-generation anti-spirit bombs. Each bomb had been proven a sizable threat to a Soul Conduit realm cultivator. The Federation had also preserved a copy of everyone's genetic information. It had used the Tao Palace's technology to preserve a part of their souls. In the event that one of them perished in their mission, they would have a chance at being resurrected once the Federation's spirit science technology reached a breakthrough in the future. What Wang Baoli could do now was give Zhao Yaming and the others the dharmic armaments that he had crafted himself. He also used his cultivation to create multiple replicas of himself and gave them to his friends. They might come in useful in a fight. He had to ensure that these replicas of himself didn't emit spirit energy, which might cause his friends unnecessary trouble. Wang Baoli tried his best to seal their spirit energy. This meant that his connection with these replicas was weakened. The result was avatars that emitted virtually no spirit energy and had no spiritual presence, yet didn't affect how powerful each avatar was. In the days that followed, Wang Baoli sensed many of the avatars that he had sent to his friends dropping out of his radar. He knew what their disappearance meant. It meant that his friends had left the solar system. His spirits low, he left his house and began wandering ethereal city alone. He watched as pedestrians and vehicles made their way across the city and listened to the bustle of the city around him. Then, he wandered some more, aimlessly, and found himself next to a lake. He sat down and stared at the lake, as well as the lotus leaves adrift on the surface of the lake, as he began to think. He thought about his childhood, his college days, and his time in the Tao Palace. Finally, he thought of his battle with Daoist Yuran and Ziyu's soul seed, and the strand that extended deep into the cosmos. Time passed slowly. The sun set, and the moon rose. Wang Baoli's eyes grew brighter. He didn't notice that someone had appeared behind him a while ago. It was a young man, and he had a wooden sword on his back and a gourd in his hand as he leaned against a huge tree. He watched Wang Baoli as he drank from his gourd. There was an unfathomable look in his eyes. He seemed to be deliberating on his words and how to begin to comfort Wang Baoli. Wang Baoli didn't seem to notice him. Instead, the light in Wang Baoli's eyes grew increasingly brighter, and he began to mutter to himself. They have their mission. I, too, have mine. With great power comes great responsibility. I might care nothing for fame and reputation, and might be as carefree as a wild bird, intent on living a free life, but for the Federation, I have no choice but to take up the heavy burden of the Federation president. There is no way around it. I didn't ask for an incredible, heaven-defying level of cultivation, a pure and righteous heart, and amazing looks. The people need me. The Federation needs me. Yes, the Alliance needs me to become their president. The expression of the young man leaning against the tree turned odd when he heard those words. He slapped his forehead lightly and swallowed the words of comfort he had wanted to say to Wang Baoli. I can't dwell on my friend's departure. I have to get my spirits up. I have to unleash my power, the power of the most handsome man in the Federation. Wang Baoli got to his feet suddenly as he muttered to himself. He lifted his head skyward and was about to shout out a few words of encouragement directed to himself. His mouth opened, but before he could say anything, he heard someone coughing behind him. It was a sound filled with exasperation. My dear junior brother, you have a really unique way of cheering yourself up. When Wang Baoli heard that, he immediately stiffened. Then, he turned his head abruptly. His eyes landed on the young man leaning against a huge tree. It was his senior brother, Chen Qing. He stared at Chen Qing. Instead of starting a conversation immediately, Wang Baoli fell silent. Chen Qing mirrored his silence. They stood by the lake. A breeze swept past, stirring ripples on the surface of the lake and their hair. A long moment passed, and Chen Qing rubbed his forehead. Then he sighed and flung his gourd towards Wang Baoli. His eyes were earnest as he said softly, Baoli, intelligent souls are often sensitive ones as well. I only found this out when I came here just now. Don't misunderstand me. The matter that lies unresolved in your heart. I didn't put it there. Chapter 728, The Heavenly Tao's Calamity. Chapter 728, The Heavenly Tao's Calamity. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. To live one's youth carefree and without worries. 'Tis the happiness one felt that made one young. The saying was where the name of the Green Forest Lake in Ethereal Tao College had come from. The lake had been witness to the rise of the Ethereal Tao College in the Spirit Inception era. It had also been witness to Wang Baoli's growth, from when he had been a mere youth to where he was today. It remained an observer even to this day, observing the changing of the seasons, as autumn crept gradually over these lands and as he grew from a teen to a young man. It observed even now, as he stood, back against the lake, staring at his senior brother Chen Qing's silhouette. His hair was flying, astray in the autumn wind. Gone with the chilly breeze was his youth as well. What remained were the scars that time had left behind, in place of what had been a youth's carefree thoughts. Even his reflection on the surface of the lake looked dark and unfathomable. A lotus leaf drifted past in the next moment, stirring ripples that unsettled the stillness of his image. It seemed like a mirror of Wang Baoli's inner thoughts, how he too wasn't as calm as he seemed. He took the gourd from his senior brother, taking a huge gulp from it without even examining what he was drinking. The alcohol was strong, and a single gulp could intoxicate one slightly. Wang Baoli finished half a gourd full of alcohol, then handed it back to his senior brother. He stared at his senior, then started speaking very softly. Senior brother, I've wanted to ask you this for a long time. What I saw in the dark dream, what happened to you, is that really true? The moon flooded the scene with its cold light. It was quiet, disturbed only by the autumn breeze, whose chill seemed to intoxicate Wang Baoli further. His question seemed to conceal beneath it something that a stranger would have found difficult to discern. The lotus leaves in the lake swayed slightly in the autumn breeze while someone gazed out into the lake, sleep escaping him. That someone was Wang Baoli. Something was weighing heavily on his mind. Everything started with the last battle with Daoist Ran. It had persisted when Wang Baoli had returned to Ethereal City, remaining on his mind while he was in his parents' company and while he was whiling his time away peacefully, and it hadn't gone away. He hadn't been able to let it go. What he had done had been to set it aside, burying it deep and trying not to think about it at all. If not for Chen Qing broaching the topic, Wang Baoli might have left it buried in the deepest recesses of his mind, and never spoken about it. During the last battle with Daoist Ran, Ziyu's sudden change of mind had been too abrupt. It had shocked Wang Baoli and pushed him into unleashing his full potential, to the point of exhausting himself completely. That had resulted in his establishing a firm connection with the coffin on Pluto. Everything had happened so naturally, so coincidentally, it had seemed too good to be true. Any misstep during that battle could have resulted in the extermination of the Federation civilization, and the deaths of his family and friends. Perhaps everything that had happened had indeed been a fortunate series of coincidences. But there was also the possibility of someone influencing the turn of events secretly. Wang Baoli had no idea how that could have been done. He wasn't surprised at all that his senior brother Chen Qing had broached this topic, and he wasn't going to use this as evidence to argue that Chen Qing had been the mastermind behind everything. He had only asked one question. He believed Chen Qing knew what he was trying to say. Chen Qing did. The young woman who had been destined to become his Dao partner had her fate changed due to someone's interference. As a result, she had been destroyed in both form and spirit. Who could claim that he hadn't suffered as well? He might seem without worries, but the truth was that he was still struggling with his loss. He didn't want this pain, and he wasn't going to inflict something like this on another person. Chen Qing took the gourd wordlessly, then finished the rest of the drink in a single gulp. He shut his eyes. After a long moment, he opened them, then looked straight into Wang Baoli's eyes and said softly, "Dear junior brother, I didn't do it. But I will admit that, my intention to make Ziyu become a source of nourishment for you caused this. Give me some time. I will find out who is secretly trying to pit us against each other." Wang Baoli eyed Chen Qing, then laughed. The heaviness in his heart still lingered. But now, he was sure that what had happened was either a coincidence or, some mysterious power had indeed instigated the entire thing and pushed things into motion for reasons beyond his knowledge. "Senior brother, you still have wine?" Wang Baoli asked with a smile, ease entering his heart. Chen Qing watched as Wang Baoli returned to his normal cheerful self and laughed. He pulled out 2 gourds, and the both of them sat by the lake sparkling under the light of the autumn moon and began drinking. This was meant to be a beautiful scene. Moonlit, next to a lake rippling gently in the breeze. 2 men dressed in robes, young and handsome, like deities who weren't of this world. The autumn breeze was chilly, but they were warmed by the wine in their bellies. Then, Chen Qing told Wang Baoli his purpose for his current trip to the Federation. It was to take Wang Baoli away. Wang Baoli blinked, and his lips started smacking. He pulled out a few bags of snacks and began eating noisily. Chen Qing watched in a daze as Wang Baoli handed a few bags of snacks over to him before pulling out a soy egg from his storage bag. Chen Qing took the sticky, gooey soy egg from Wang Baoli and bit into it instinctively. He was about to say something when Wang Baoli raised his gourd up into the air and knocked it against his own. "Come, senior brother, let's drink." That wasn't the end of it. Wang Baoli pulled out a dozen sticks of raw chicken wings marinated in spices. As he continued drinking, he cast a spell and began grilling the wings. A stunned Chen Qing watched as Wang Baoli pulled out a seemingly endless supply of meat skewers and all manners of grilled foods. In the end, Wang Baoli pulled out a pot and started cooking a huge goose. Half a plate of green peppers was thrown into the pot. The atmosphere had changed drastically at that point. A scene that had been ethereal and out of this world was now mundane and ordinary. "Come on, eat. There's no need to be polite when you're with me, senior brother." Chen Qing stared, slightly lost for words as Wang Baoli continued to eat and drink at the same time. He rubbed his forehead and tried to continue his earlier words. "Baoli, I'm going to take you to..." Before Chen Qing could finish his words, Wang Baoli had drunk the last drop in his gourd. His eyes were misty as he turned and grinned stupidly at his senior brother. Then, he tilted his head and fell to his side. He had fallen asleep. It was clear to Chen Qing that Wang Baoli didn't want to leave and that he was doing this on purpose. Chen Qing didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He raised his right hand. With a slight wave, an invisible force entered Wang Baoli's body and pushed the alcohol out. Wang Baoli opened his eyes reluctantly. Before Chen Qing could say anything, he suddenly smacked his forehead. "Oh no, I have to go, senior brother. My mom told me that I have to return home before 1 in the morning every day. Let's talk again tomorrow." Wang Baoli got to his feet hastily. He was about to leave when Chen Qing pointed at him. Wang Baoli's legs froze, his feet stuck firmly to the ground. No matter how much Wang Baoli struggled, how wildly his upper body flailed, his legs remained immobile and firmly rooted to the ground. "But, senior brother, I don't want to go." Wang Baoli's face was all scrunched up as he stared back at Chen Qing. Chen Qing glared. He could feel his head pulsing with pain. "Baoli, the dark sect might have fallen, but there are still survivors who've gone underground and are still around. They formed an underground sect. You are a dark child. As your senior brother, I am to send you back to the sect on behalf of our master, so that you can continue your training. Senior brother, my parents are old. I can't bear to part with them. I'm scared that they'll be gone when I return. I'll take care of this for you. Your parents are my elders too. I'll give them pills that will extend their lifespans for another 200 years. That'll solve your problem. There's no way you'll still be away after 200 years. When you return, I can still help you find more of these pills." "Oh. Thanks, senior brother. But, senior brother, my girlfriends are all in the Federation. What will happen to them if I leave? I'm afraid the next time I return to the Federation, I'll find them married to other men," Wang Baoli said hastily as he tried to make his senior brother change his mind. "Don't worry. Think of your current status in the Federation. Who would dare to steal your women?" Chen Qing said coolly. He raised his right hand and, with a wave, dragged Wang Baoli away into the air with him. They lifted off the ground, ready to leave Earth. Wang Baoli panicked. "I don't want to go. I haven't become the Federation president yet. Let's negotiate. Why not wait for me to become president? I'll leave with you immediately after that. Deal? Baoli?" Chen Qing stopped in midair. He lowered his head and stared at Wang Baoli, the look in his eyes serious and intense. "I'm not trying to be unreasonable. The never-ending clan's heavenly Tao approaches. Every time it appears, it will scan the entire universe and destroy any presence of the dark sect it finds immediately. You are still weak and have no means to fight back. If they find you, you'll be killed instantly. That's why I've told you many times to prepare yourself, because I'm going to take you away. The only way for you to escape the approaching power of the never-ending clan's heavenly Tao is to follow me to the underground dark sect, and receive the blessings of what remains of the dark sect's heavenly Tao. You might have realized this, but the heavenly Tao can be considered an extremely powerful artifact. Only heavenly Tao can fight heavenly Tao. The dark sect's heavenly Tao might be mostly destroyed, but it's not completely annihilated. What remains can protect you. The coffin that you found inside the planet Pluto in the Solar System Alliance? Our master used his great power to send it here. To evade the eyes of the never-ending clan's heavenly Tao, he had to send it through time. He had to use a great spell in order for the coffin to travel through time and reach you here. His objective was to give you a place to fall into deep slumber so that you could avoid the approaching calamity. You can either enter the coffin every 10 years and sleep the next 100 years away, or you can follow me and settle this problem once and for all. Which option are you going to choose? Chapter 729, Take Off. Chapter 729, Take Off. Wang Baoli shook when he heard that. He had guessed that the coffin had been a gift from his master, but he hadn't realized its purpose. He was to hide inside and sleep away the calamity that was headed his way. His senior brother's words proved that his guesses regarding the heavenly Tao were correct. The heavenly Tao, to a certain extent, could be considered as a supreme weapon. He also agreed with the never-ending clan's position on the heavenly Tao. Together with his existing knowledge of the dark sect's history, he could somewhat piece together what had happened in the past. The dark sect had changed the heavenly Tao and written down the laws for the universe. The never-ending clan had gathered the clans to revolt against them and destroy the heavenly Tao. They had caused the fall of the dark sect, then rewritten their own version of the heavenly Tao. After replacing the dark sect, the never-ending clan had continued exterminating survivors of the dark sect. His senior brother was clearly an exceptional case. Chen Qing watched as emotions flashed past Wang Baoli's face. He sighed softly. Baoli, I know you don't wish to leave your home. But it's necessary that you leave. Your departure will also become a source of hope for the Federation's civilization. Hope? Wang Baoli lifted his head and stared at his senior brother questioningly. The Federation is still too primitive a civilization. It's like a child compared to the rest of the universe. It has virtually no means to protect itself. Let's not even consider the scenario of an eternal star realm cultivator coming across the Federation. If a mere planet realm cultivator comes across the Federation and wishes to refine it, he could do so easily. Chen Qing didn't mince his words. He laid the truth out bluntly. Wang Baoli fell silent. He knew that his senior brother was speaking the truth. The Federation was undoubtedly a relatively weak civilization. Spirit Qi had only made its appearance in the Federation a few decades ago. The spirit meridians on Earth weren't yet fully formed, and they had to create their own spirit stones. They might not be an infant cultivation civilization, but it wasn't wrong to call them a mere child when compared to other civilizations. Of course, there's still the vast expanse Tao Palace on the ancient sword. But in my view, even though there are powerful elders slumbering on the ancient sword, most of them are with serious injury. They might lend a hand if something were to threaten their survival, but if the danger in question is only towards the Federation, will they even be bothered to help? Of course, there's also the question of whether the Federation will still exist when they awake. Chen Qing stared at Wang Baoli as he continued speaking. His words rendered Wang Baoli speechless yet again. He had little missy with him, so he believed that there was a great chance that the vast expanse Tao Palace elders would become their allies after they woke up. But this was still a gamble. It was placing one's survival in the hands of others. A sudden change in mindset might be all the difference. Wang Baoli wasn't in favor of such passivity. What's the point of you remaining in the Federation? If you really wish for your home civilization to evolve and prosper, the best way is to let the Federation civilization become more powerful. There are two ways to do that. One is to allow time to do its work. As time passes, the generations will continue to evolve. However, based on the solar system's potential and its current structure, this method will require a great deal of time. Even if no accident were to befall the Federation during this time, its evolution would still require tens of thousands of years. That's why the second method will suit the Federation better. Wang Baoli lifted his head again when Chen Qing said that. His eyes shone brightly. Senior brother, what's the second method? It's a shortcut. As you advance the level of your cultivation, you will also be helping your civilization consume other civilizations. Chen Qing paused for a few moments before replying abruptly. His reply revealed the hidden laws by which the universe operated. The foundation of every civilization is an eternal star. Only star systems with eternal stars have the potential to give birth to cultivation civilizations. A civilization's eternal star, its sun, is what's most precious to the civilization. That is because the sun is the essence of all life. In your solar system, the sun is your main essence of life. If you can guide your civilization's sun into devouring the eternal stars of other civilizations, you can make your sun more powerful. Both its propulsive force and its energy stores will increase. It will become a force of nature in the cosmos. The eternal stars and the civilizations that it consumes will become its servants. As the Federation's eternal star grows increasingly more powerful, the cultivators of the Federation will also see more rapid advancements in their cultivation. That is the hidden law of this universe and the root of all wars between civilizations. The never-ending clan doesn't interfere in such wars. Across the universe, countless civilizations are engaging in war and pillage freely, all in order to strengthen themselves. So, how will you choose? An unfathomable light glimmered in Chen Qing's eyes as he stared at Wang Baoli. Wang Baoli fell silent, though his breathing had quickened slightly. After a long moment of silence, a look of determination settled in his eyes. He turned towards Chen Qing, cupped his fists, and bowed. I'll do whatever senior brother instructs me to do. But I'd like to have another day. I'd also like to request a protective spell to be cast over the Federation, as a layer of defense. Sure. Chen Qing nodded. Without wasting any time at all, he raised his right hand. With a wave of his hand and a series of hand seals, a sudden burst of sword chi erupted in the heavens. It descended upon the earth, buried itself underground, then vanished without a trace. Wang Baoli's bindings were loosened at the same moment. I'll be waiting for you outside Earth. Having said that, Chen Qing flung a storage bag towards Wang Baoli, turned, and dashed off into the skies. He disappeared instantly. Wang Baoli stood in midair and gazed into the direction his senior brother had vanished. A long moment passed before he finally made up his mind. He turned and headed straight for the ethereal city. He reached home, then sat inside his house quietly. When dawn broke, Wang Baoli got to his feet and began preparing breakfast for his parents. When his parents woke up, he turned towards them and got to his knees. He explained gently to the shocked elderly couple, making up a reason instead of telling them the truth because he didn't want to cause them to worry. The farewell was a painful, heartbreaking affair. They had their breakfast, then Wang Baoli cast a few protective spells over his parents, and watched as they took the pills his senior brother had given him to extend their lifespans. Finally, Wang Baoli gave his parents a deep bow and left. He found Bunny, then Li Wanna. He sent Li Xingwen and Duan Muke each a voice transmission. The Martian colony governor and a few others were shocked when they heard that Wang Baoli was leaving, while Li Xingwen was almost beside himself with anxiety. Duan Muke was speechless, having no idea what to do with himself or with the situation. But Wang Baoli had no choice. He wanted to stay, but he knew his senior brother was right. For himself, and for the future of the Federation, he had to leave. Hope for them rested beyond the solar system. He still regretted the fact that he hadn't been able to become the Federation president. In the end, the Martian colony governor was made the next Federation president. Wang Baoli's departure from the Federation was designated as top secret. To the general public, he had retreated into seclusion. His one-day's grace soon came to an end. Wang Baoli witnessed his last sunset on Earth, then got to his feet and headed for the stars. As soon as he reached space, Chen Qing appeared beside him. With a wave of his hand, the cosmos was transformed instantly. The both of them teleported away from Earth and reappeared in the next moment, on Pluto. It's a long way to the underground dark sect. We have to pass 7 restricted regions and go through the Never-Ending Clan's primary territory. The time of the Never-Ending Clan's heavenly Tao approaches. For your safety, you have to go into deep sleep inside the coffin. This coffin is a gift from our master. It's a unique artifact that can't be stored away in a storage bag, so I'll have to carry it. The journey will take us 10 years or so. We'll reach our destination by the time you wake up. Wang Baoli was rendered speechless as he listened to Chen Qing's explanation. He felt helpless at the thought of having to sleep away 10 years of his life. He knew there was no other way around it though, so he nodded his consent. Pluto shuddered as Chen Qing waved his hand, and huge crevices split the ground apart. Towers of black mist rose to the heavens, then gathered and transformed into an enormous coffin right before Wang Baoli's eyes. Chen Qing formed a series of hand seals, and the coffin shook and shrank in size rapidly. Finally, it settled into a normal-sized coffin that was no longer made of mist but of a tangible, black metal. The sense of age that exuded from the coffin appeared stronger at that instant. The runes that shimmered on the lid of the coffin gave off waves of unimaginable, overwhelming power. Do I really have to sleep in the coffin? Wang Baoli sighed. Don't worry, Baoli, it's just a nap. You'll reach the place in no time. Chen Qing smiled at Wang Baoli as he raised his right hand and waved. The coffin lid slid open slowly, and mist flowed out of the coffin. Wang Baoli rubbed his forehead, then took a huge step and got inside. He lay inside the coffin. It wasn't as uncomfortable as he had thought it might be. In fact, it felt warm. Wang Baoli began to feel sleepy. He yawned, then muttered, "It's not bad, actually, to sleep for 10 years. I'll be there when I wake up." I hope nothing happens during the journey. Don't worry, nothing will happen. Chen Qing stood outside the coffin and laughed. He slid the lid shut, then lifted it. Afterwards, he began walking towards the stars swiftly. Within 3 steps, he was out of the solar system. He didn't stop. With another step, he was away, headed for the distant stars. Chapter 730, An Accident. Chapter 730, An Accident. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. The Divine Eye system was a star system twice the size of the solar system. It had 23 big planets that orbited the system's primary star. The planets rotated ceaselessly, as if in an eternal orbit. Like the solar system, the Divine Eye system had its own civilization as well. It was clearly more advanced than the Federation, though both civilizations shared similar environments. That might be why the life forms in the Divine Eye system civilization resembled the human life forms found in the Federation. There were, however, some slight physiological differences between both species. On this day, on the primary planet where the Divine Eye civilization was based, a planet that was the size of Jupiter in the solar system, a meteor fell and made a landing. The unique features of the Divine Eye star meant that meteors were a common sight. As a result, while a portion of the populace noted the arrival of the meteor, few paid much attention to it. Only selected cultivators who were in the vicinity of the meteor's landing would think of checking it out in case any special resources might be recovered. That was also the reason why fights often broke out amongst cultivators. In this particular instance, the meteor crashed into the planet, creating a huge crater on the ground. A coffin followed. Upon impact, it pierced deep into the earth of the planet soundlessly. It then stopped moving, as if it had just been buried. This coffin was black and appeared as if it were crafted from a black metal. On its surface were countless runes. However, most of the runes appeared to be damaged. In fact, the coffin itself was ridden with holes and marks, countless scratches lining its surface. They appeared to be caused by some sharp weapon. A few seemed deep, nearly deep enough to cut through the coffin. From the looks of it, it seemed that someone had blocked the attack just when the cuts had almost penetrated the coffin. If they hadn't done so, the coffin might have been split into multiple parts and destroyed. It was clear that the coffin had survived an unimaginable battle, one that had been fierce and intense beyond measure. Else, there was no way that such a powerful artifact would be damaged to such a degree. If one were to examine the coffin more closely, they would find dried bloodstains all over it, though they weren't red. It was clear that it had been a battle that involved numerous warriors. This coffin had traveled all the way from the solar system. It was the Dark Sex coffin, which Chen Qing was carrying, and which housed Wang Baoli's sleeping form. The meteor's crash into the ground and the coffin's burial deep underground had sent quakes shuddering through the earth. The deep cuts on the coffin had almost splintered from the impact. The quake shook the coffin and Wang Baoli, who had been deep asleep inside. He opened his eyes. "Are we there?" What a great nap! Wang Baoli rubbed his eyes, yawned, and pushed at the coffin lid. He couldn't nudge it open. Surprised, he began to call out loudly. "Senior brother, are we there yet?" Wang Baoli waited a while longer but heard no reply, which he found bizarre. He smacked the coffin a few times, then focused his cultivation and called out again. "Senior brother, are you there? What's going on, senior brother? Come on, answer me." The expression on Wang Baoli's face gradually turned somber. He continued shouting but received no response, so the unease inside him grew. "Little Missy, are you there?" After a long bout of silence, Wang Baoli decided to play it safe and not push the coffin lid open with his dark fire. Instead, he tried calling out to Little Missy. This was the backup plan he had set up before he had fallen into slumber. There was no reply from Little Missy either. Wang Baoli narrowed his eyes and began to think. But no matter how hard he thought, he couldn't think himself out of this puzzle. He had fallen asleep as soon as he had entered the coffin. It was difficult to judge if he had reached his destination. After contemplation, he decided to wait. Wang Baoli patiently counted the days as they passed. On the 3rd day, a sharp look finally entered his eyes. There's a great chance that something unexpected has happened. Dark fire burned in Wang Baoli's eyes. He raised his right hand and placed it against the coffin. His cultivation erupted, immediately establishing his connection with the coffin. Just as he was about to push the lid open, a faint voice entered the coffin. It seemed to come from somewhere else. The voice echoed in Wang Baoli's head. Baoli? Senior brother. Wang Baoli's eyes sharpened. He stopped trying to push open the coffin lid and asked hastily, Senior brother, what happened? Are you outside? Baoli, something happened along the way. For the time being, I've a minor civilization. Wait for me to pick you up. Make sure your true form doesn't leave. The heavenly Tao approaches. Death is certain. Mystic technique for creating avatars. Temporarily escape discovery by the heavenly Tao. Okay to leave. The message was intermittent. It was as if some sort of strong disturbance was disrupting the transmission. The result was an incomplete message from Chen Qing. Nevertheless, Wang Baoli was able to piece together the main gist of Chen Qing's message. Something unexpected happened? I'm being deposited temporarily on a minor cultivation? The heavenly Tao approaches, and I'll die if my true form leaves the coffin? But if I practice this mystic technique that allows me to create an avatar of myself, I can leave the coffin for short periods of time. Wang Baoli frowned. He had no idea what had happened to Chen Qing. However, he could imagine that something that could force someone as powerful as Chen Qing to leave him somewhere must be something quite extraordinary. Chen Qing's voice continued intermittently as he transmitted a mystic technique to Wang Baoli. Chen Qing appeared to have spent most of his efforts on this part of his message, preventing the interference from disrupting the transmission and hence allowing the full mystic technique to be transmitted successfully. The name of this mystic technique was the illusory source art. Once mastered, it could allow one to change their aura as well as their very essence. They would be able to transform into anything. Wang Baoli examined the mystic technique carefully. Then he started thinking. There were a few steps in this mystic technique that involved the cultivator's soul. Wang Baoli was a dark child, and he had read many pieces of literature during his time in the dark sect. He knew that there were spells out there that were malicious or could assert deep control over their victims. However, these spells couldn't be cast involuntarily on their victims, and required their victims to willingly practice them before the malicious effects of the spells could take place. Is this real, or is it just a trick? Did Senior Brother really encounter something unexpected, or this was something really important? Wang Baoli couldn't stop analyzing everything he knew in detail. He studied the mystic technique silently, not knowing whether he should try it. His eyes stared up at the inside of the coffin lid. If he wanted to push it open, he needed only to unleash his dark fire. Leaving the coffin would be a piece of cake. Should I train? Should I open the coffin? Sometimes, choices were difficult decisions to make. Especially the ones concerning trust, and even more so when said decision concerned one's life or death. As Wang Baoli fell into a contemplative silence, somewhere beyond the divine eye system lay a vaster star system. Thousands of smaller star systems were housed within this greater star system, forming a cosmic array formation. It was an array formation of tremendously ambitious scale. It used the energy of thousands of eternal stars, both big and small, as fuel that then became an endless source of power that could overpower everything in its path. What made the array formation even more impressive were the 8 cauldrons distributed around the array formation, floating in the cosmos while separated from one another by vast expanses of space. Each cauldron exuded an extremely old and fearsome power. One could see an indistinct figure inside the cauldron, which appeared to be trapped in an endless cycle of refinement. The array formation, formed from thousands of eternal stars, and its 8 powerful cauldrons, were a cage. Their prisoner was Chen Qing. A stormy-faced Chen Qing stood in the center of the array formation. Around him flashed bolts of black lightning. They came from all directions, thundering as they descended. They appeared like numerous chains that crisscrossed the entire star system. Before Chen Qing stood a man. He wore golden armor, had a towering figure, and had 3 heads and 6 arms. He was like a god of war who exuded an overpowering aura that rivaled the power of the entire cosmic array formation. Behind him stood armies of illusory figures. They also looked like deities in their own right, exuding waves of terrifying power. The armored man looked like a god who commanded a vast army and stood supreme above all others. Chen Qing, I know what the boy means to you. That's why I allowed you to send your voice transmission and only disrupted the transmission partially. Why don't you make a guess? Will this dear junior brother whom you treasure so much choose to believe you? I look forward to seeing what he'll choose." The towering man smiled. As his voice resonated in the cosmos, tens of thousands of black lightning bolts snaked past one another, thundering as they expanded and finally transformed into a dark screen. On the screen was an image of Wang Baoli's coffin. However, what it showed wasn't the inside of the coffin but its exterior. Who do you think will walk out? Your precious junior brother's true form, or his avatar? Chapter 731, A Sense of Shame? What's that? Chapter 731, A Sense of Shame? What's that? Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Wang Baoli was oblivious to the battle taking place between his senior brother Chen Qing and the armored man. It didn't influence the decision he finally settled on. He only took a while before his eyes flashed with determination, and he finally made up his mind. Overthinking will just make it difficult for me to decide. Of course, I have to weigh the risks involved in the final decision made, but such excessive wariness isn't the act of a real man. Senior brother has helped me so many times. I shouldn't doubt him on this. Wang Baoli took a deep breath, then pressed his palms together in a series of hand seals. He immediately began learning the mystic technique that Chen Qing had given him. The mystic technique wasn't meant to improve his level of cultivation. Instead, it was to allow him the ability to change and create an illusion of himself. Wang Baoli used the dark art to quicken his learning process. A few hours later, he opened his eyes, which had two ghostly spheres of light shimmering within. His body blurred as he split into multiple forms, and soon, multiple replicas of himself overlaid one another. Upon closer examination, one would count 9 replicas in total. "Avatar, appear!" Wang Baoli barked. Then, an avatar separated from him slowly, drifting aside. It was followed by the second, then the third, all the way up to the 9th avatar. They fused together rapidly and finally reappeared as a singular avatar before Wang Baoli. It looked no different from Wang Baoli's true form. He was identical in both flesh and blood, as well as in spirit. Wang Baoli's stellar nascent soul had split in half as well, with one half entering the avatar. In fact, one could no longer simply call him an avatar. He was Wang Baoli's second essence soul. A person's second essence soul shared everything with his true form. That was why he shouldn't resort to self-destructing his second essence soul recklessly. The second essence soul's level of cultivation and battle capabilities were only slightly weaker than the true form's abilities. For Wang Baoli, it meant that his second essence soul was at the early stage nascent soul realm. That didn't detract from how amazing the mystic technique was. It wasn't the same as Wang Baoli's previous forms of avatars. This second nascent soul realm essence soul could train independently. When he returned and fused with Wang Baoli's true form, Wang Baoli would receive a boost in cultivation as well. The second essence soul straddled the realms of reality and illusion, and Wang Baoli could switch his true form with his essence soul anytime. These two very important points were why Chen Qing had given this mystic technique to Wang Baoli. After examining the unique traits of his avatar, Wang Baoli took a deep breath, then shut his eyes. The moment his eyes fell shut, his second essence soul opened his eyes. It's similar to controlling my previous avatars in many ways, and different in some as well. Wang Baoli number 2 raised his hand and touched his own face. He stared at Wang Baoli number 1 next to him. The latter's eyes opened instantly, and they began a staring contest. In the past, controlling my avatar was like controlling a part of myself, like moving my arm. With a single thought, I could get it to execute all my orders. This avatar though, it's no longer like an arm. It's like having another me. Wang Baoli number 2 muttered as he stared at Wang Baoli number 1. He coughed. "What do you think?" "Seems like it." "Interesting," Wang Baoli number 1 said as he rubbed his chin and nodded. "In that case, you stay here and have a good nap. I'll go outside and check out what's going on. I'll try and look for traces of senior brother at the same time as well," Wang Baoli number 2 said seriously. "All right. Be careful while you're outside. If possible, try to find out how far away we are from the solar system as well, Wang Baoli number 1 said with a contemplative look. Then, he stared at Wang Baoli number 2 again. Does this look lame? Us talking to each other like this? We're clearly one person, but we have to pretend to have a conversation like two separate people. What do you think senior brother was thinking when he came up with this mystic technique? He should have a second essence soul as well. I think, based on senior brother's character, he might have made his second essence soul a woman. After a long while, Wang Baoli number 2 blinked and said, I think so too. But we, Wang Baoles, are righteous folks. We won't even think about doing something as perverted as that. We do have to get used to talking like this from now on though. Wang Baoli number 1 took a deep breath and said in all solemnness. All right. I'm off then. I'll leave you with these parting words. Wang Baoli, you're really handsome. Wang Baoli, you're incredibly handsome too. Wang Baoli number 1 and Wang Baoli number 2's spirits soared when they heard the other's earnest and so very honest compliments of themselves. Wang Baoli number 1 handed his storage bag to Wang Baoli number 2. Then, the latter unleashed his dark fire and sent it towards the coffin lid. The moment the dark fire came into contact with the coffin, Wang Baoli number 2 transformed into an illusory sphere of fire that passed straight through the coffin. When he reappeared again, he was outside the coffin. The coffin was surrounded by ice that was a mix of black and brown. An intense chill that seemed capable of freezing one's soul attacked Wang Baoli number 2 immediately. His eyes flashed, and he extended his divine sense to their limits. It turned out that they could only go as far as 100 feet. Fortunately, he could see his surroundings clearly. He was standing in a layer of ice of an unknown age, and the coffin was buried deep under the ice. However, beyond that, he couldn't sense anything. The coffin's unique properties might have prevented the ice from caving in after the coffin's abrupt entry. It had seemingly passed through the layer of ice and appeared under it. An overwhelming suppressive force permeated the icy surrounding and its chilly air. Wang Baoli's form was still in an illusory state. Even so, it couldn't withstand the cold. He was sure that if his second essence soul had materialized physically, he would very quickly freeze and die. After a simple survey of the surroundings, Wang Baoli decided not to linger on the spot. His illusory form blurred and began racing upwards, towards the surface. It was a painful journey to undertake. The chill in the ice continued to accumulate in his body as he persisted upwards. It began to affect his thoughts. Fortunately, he had his stellar nascent soul and his dark fire. Both continuously pushed back against the creeping cold. Hours later, Wang Baoli's illusory form finally dashed out of the ice and appeared inside a cave. There was no ice in the cave. Nevertheless, it was still chilly. Wang Baoli scanned his surroundings, then lifted his head and stared at the frozen ground. Two ghostly lights appeared and lit his illusory form's head from the inside. Is this a planet? Wang Baoli wondered to himself. His senses extended beyond the layer of ice. Nothing stopped him as his senses stretched further outward. Even so, Wang Baoli could sense a certain degree of suppressive energy present in this world. Its spirit chi was significantly richer than the spirit chi in the Federation. However, absorbing it seemed a slight challenge. There was something stopping him from doing so. There were clearly different rules at play here. A flicker of light crossed Wang Baoli's eyes. He raced towards the skies and activated his cultivation before stretching his divine sense to their limits. It didn't take long before his divine sense extended beyond the patch of icy land and reached what lay beyond. The skies weren't a pale blue. They were shades darker. They looked similar to the skies of Earth. The sun stood high in the skies and gave off light and warmth, but the light was cold, and the warmth not enough to melt the ice on the ground. As for the lands, with a single glance, he saw the rise and fall of mountainous forms. The place looked wild, the plant life frightening. Not all of the land was covered in ice and snow. However, the soil was hard. That, as well as the moisture in the air, were chilly as well. The winds themselves were a piercing cold that seeped into one's bones. In the distance was a mountain that had caved in. Shattered rocks littered the place, and underneath the piles of rocks was a huge crater that contained 4 corpses. Beyond the crater was a person running farther into the distance, seemingly injured. Wang Baoli narrowed his eyes and swept them over the person running further away from him. The latter appeared not to have noticed his presence. Then, with a sudden shift, Wang Baoli appeared next to the crater. His eyes landed on the 4 corpses. They had died recently, and their bodies had been searched. Comment: murder and robbery? Wang Baoli rubbed his chin. He then raised his right hand and formed a couple of hand seals, pointing at the corpses. Soul, form. At that exact moment, beyond the divine eye system, within the array formation formed from thousands of eternal stars, an intense battle was taking place as well. Chen Qing was exuding a fierce aura, one that was more intense than usual. Wang Baoli's choice had made him happy and brought him a measure of comfort as well. The armored man, on the other hand, didn't look as well. He had thought he had found Chen Qing's weakness. He had intended to exploit that weakness and distract Chen Qing. It didn't matter the degree of distraction, any form of it would give him an opening. What had happened instead had been beyond his expectations. The boy, whom he had viewed as a mere ant, hadn't been affected at all by his baiting. I was overly hasty. My plan would have succeeded if I'd simply been patient and waited a while longer. Chapter 732, Long Nanzi. Chapter 732, Long Nanzi. No one knew how long Chen Qing's battle would last. It might end quickly, or it might drag on for much longer. For cultivators in that league, time itself was a weapon. Wang Baoli wasn't entirely sure what had happened, but he could make his own educated guesses. As he emerged above ground and stared at the world around him, realization dawned upon him. He was possibly going to spend quite some time alone in a foreign civilization. That was why what he needed to do now was find out what he could about the civilization he was in. He formed a series of hand seals and summoned the souls of the 4 recently dead corpses with his dark art. 4 incomplete souls gathered before him in wisps and finally transformed into 4 spirits invisible to the eyes of others. Without any hesitation, Wang Baoli raised his right hand and clawed through the air. The 4 souls raced towards him and entered his palm. Their past memories flooded Wang Baoli's mind. After tidying up their memories, Wang Baoli finally pieced together what had happened prior to their deaths. The 4 of them, and the one who had escaped earlier, had sensed a meteor's landing. Since they had been in the area, they had hurried over to check it out. Wang Baoli did some calculations. He was quite sure that the meteor that they had seen had been a result of the coffin's landing. It might have been due to the unique nature of the coffin or something his senior brother had done. During its travel in space, the coffin had attracted certain materials that had clearly been quite valuable. That must have been the cause of the fight amongst the 5 cultivators. 4 of them had died in the fight, while 1 had survived with some injuries. The survivor had taken everything and escaped. That should be the gist of it. Wang Baoli continued to go through the new information he had just received. His eyes glowed as he came upon information regarding this world. The Divine Eye civilization was twice the size of the solar system and was spread across 23 planets. Its cultivation hierarchy was similar to what Wang Baoli had come across. Cultivation levels were split into the planet realm and the eternal star realm. Its society was structured differently from the Federation though. In the past, the civilization had been governed by a royal monarch. However, as time passed, the royalty gradually lost power while the people grew stronger. They came together and set up numerous sects. Then, resources became more sparse. It became a dog-eat-dog world. The royal family was essentially neutered and powerless to interfere. The Divine Eye civilization underwent another transformation then. It became a society that revolved around pillaging and plunder, a hostile place filled with pirates and robbers. They robbed their own and those from other civilizations. It was all in the name of one's own survival. In fact, there were no laws fixed in stone in this civilization. Only one law prevailed, and it was that the strong prevailed over the weak. Every sect and institution had gone over to the dark side. Luck appeared to be on the Divine Eye civilization's side. The civilizations found on the planets and in the star systems around it were not very advanced. The Divine Eye civilization also took care not to attack those stronger than it was. It grew increasingly powerful as the years passed and saw the emergence of 3 planet realm cultivators. These 3 cultivators might only be at the early stage of the planet realm, But that was still sufficient to overpower everyone in the Divine Eye civilization. They formed 3 great sects, superseding the royal family's authority and claiming 6 to 7 planets as their own. They were sects in name, a big gang of bandits in reality. Their missions were generally invasions of extraterrestrial civilizations. They plundered and pillaged, and they killed when they could. When they weren't a match for the enemy, they escaped after stealing whatever they could. The structure of such a civilization, as well as the status of these 3 great sects, led to numerous smaller sects requesting to be affiliated to them. The smaller, minor sects presented vast resources as tributes to the 3 great sects. In exchange, they were allowed to survive. The vast resources had to be acquired somehow. That was why every one of these minor sects maintained their own group of pirates. They would carry out independent raids in search of resources. When the 3 greater sects gave their orders, these minor sects would execute them in unison. It was in this manner that the power and influence of the 3 great sects grew and expanded. As the 3 great sects continued to amass resources and groom their disciples, numerous soul conduit realm cultivators and even more nascent soul realm cultivators began to emerge in their midst. The tensions amongst the 3 sects never ceased though. They all desired to take over the other 2 sects so that they could become more powerful. However, they were all equally powerful. The current 3-way political structure was too unstable. As a result, while conflict continued to persist amongst them, the 3 sects tried their best to maintain the current balance of power and prevent tensions from escalating. As Wang Baoli continued digging through the soul's memories for information on the Divine Eye civilization, he caught a glimpse of the transport they had used for raids. Amongst them was a small, yet obviously valuable cruiser that was in the form of a living creature. He stared at it for a very long time, then blinked. It looked familiar. It was a black jellyfish. Wang Baoli had owned one in the past. Sea Glutton, it had been called. He had handed it over to one of his artifact souls. His intention had been to destroy its original seal and use it to travel across space, but his battle with Uran had forced him to use it for the repair of his dark sampan. He recalled the Sea Glutton's original owners, the 3 extraterrestrial nascent soul realm cultivators who had infiltrated the Federation. As he recalled the series of criminal activities they had committed then, a strange look settled on his face. He fell into a contemplative silence. Finally, his eyes narrowed. Were they from around here as well? This should mean that I'm not far from the solar system, right? Wang Baoli's eyes widened. He was quite confident in his assessment. Unfortunately, the souls of the 4 dead were incomplete, so he couldn't get much information about his current whereabouts from them. After a long moment of contemplation, Wang Baoli decided to transform himself into one of the dead people. He'd infiltrate the Divine Eye civilization, find a star map of this region, and maybe search for other valuable information. Too old. Not for me. This one's a girl. Her looks aren't bad. But what a pity, she's not for me. This one's too thin. It seems like I'm left with no other choice but this guy. I suppose he'll have to do. After a round of inspection, Wang Baoli finally settled on a middle-aged cultivator with relatively good looks. He had been at the late-stage core formation realm prior to his death. Wang Baoli found out from his soul's memories that his name was Long Nanzi. Long Nanzi was part of one of the many smaller sects called Holy Crest Sect, which was affiliated to the Divine Sovereign Justice Sect. The Holy Crest Sect might be a small sect, but it was known for its skills at refining artifacts. That gained it some measure of influence in the civilization. There was an early-stage soul conduit realm elder in the sect as well. That gained the sect a seat at the Divine Sovereign Justice Sect's table. It maintained its own group of pirates and occasionally was given the opportunity to join the greater sect in raids. The Holy Crest Sect seemed to be facing some sort of trouble currently. Many of its disciples were out, using their own means to secure resources for refining artifacts and for their own cultivation. Having gotten the gist of the situation, Wang Baoli raised his right hand and placed it on the corpse. His illusory form began to solidify. Within 10 counts, he had transformed into the exact form of the dead cultivator on the ground. His aura was identical to the dead cultivator's. Even Long Nanzi's closest friends wouldn't be able to tell the difference. It was impossible to ensure his gestures, expressions, and habits were identical to the original Long Nanzi's. However, based on this man's memories, the hostile Divine Eye civilization ensured that no one truly trusted anyone. Everyone was always on constant alert. Naturally, no one truly knew one another. Even though he isn't as good looking as I am, I suppose beggars can't be choosers. He'll have to do. Wang Baoli touched his own face, sighed, then lifted his right hand and waved. Long Nanzi's corpse turned to dust instantly and dissipated in the wind. Wang Baoli observed his body. He could sense power in the air weighing down on him. His aura began to change. When the suppressive force in the air dissipated, the spirit chi in the air finally felt easier on his senses. He could absorb it now, without obstruction, and allow the spirit chi to flow smoothly into his body. Next, let's go check out this Divine Eye civilization and see what special stuff it's got. Wang Baoli's eyes flashed. He took a step forward and flew into the air. He kept his cultivation at the perfected core formation realm, then headed in the direction of the sect as Long Nanzi had remembered. Wang Baoli observed the alien land beneath his feet and the foreign skies above his head as he made his way through this world. Excitement began to unfurl inside him. He was an outsider in a foreign land and an alien civilization. He had nothing to lose here. He could do anything he wanted, and he looked forward to that. Chapter 733, The Holy Crest Sect. Chapter 733, The Holy Crest Sect. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. The Holy Crest Sect was a minor sect that was affiliated to the Divine Sovereign Justice Sect, one of the three great sects in the Divine Eye civilization. Its influence and clout were insignificant to the Divine Sovereign Justice Sect, and it had fewer than 1,000 followers. However, the Holy Crest Sect had a few unique strengths in refining artifacts. The sect's Grand Supreme Elder also possessed great cultivation. He had achieved the Soul Conduit realm many years ago and had always paid proper tribute to the Divine Sovereign Justice Sect. That was why the missions assigned to the Holy Crest Sect during the occasional large-scale hunt were generally easy ones that weren't very dangerous, yet yielded relatively generous rewards. The Holy Crest Sect would also conduct frequent raids to replenish its inventory. This ensured that their heavy consumption of resources when refining artifacts remained sustainable, that life remained comfortable, and that time in the sect was passed in a rich and relatively meaningful way. Unfortunately, the Holy Crest Sect's luck had taken a turn for the worse when they had come across some powerful opponents during the last raid a few months ago. As a result of the failed raid, they had not only been unable to gather new resources but had lost their own in the fight. In general, the Divine Sovereign Justice Sect wouldn't provide aid for independent raids conducted by their affiliated sects. Unless the latter presented the former with vast resources beyond their normal tribute, the Divine Sovereign Justice Sect wouldn't interfere. The Holy Crest Sect was left to their own devices. The Holy Crest Sect had suffered heavy losses from the raid, and the fact that the season for making tribute every year was approaching made things worse. Everyone in the sect was plagued by worry. They tightened their belts while their hunger for resources, for refining artifacts and cultivation, intensified and reached its climax. Inner sect disciples often went out and employed all means and ways to resolve their need for resources. Some made their artifact refinement services available to others, while others joined other sects. Some began fighting amongst themselves. Others, like Long Nanzi, wandered the lands in search of opportunity. Despite the dire situation they were in, the Holy Crest Sect was still a sect that had been standing for 2,000 years. It had built a sizable store, and that was evident. Its mountain gates were constructed from black ink soil and were situated on the fifth mountain ring on the Divine Eye planet. The center of the planet was a basin where the royal residence stood. The residence was closed to the public permanently. The royal grounds were surrounded by 8 vast mountain ranges that circled the royal residence like 8 huge powerful dragons. Each mountain range was separated by vast stretches of land. Some said that the land between each mountain range could form an entire world. They weren't exaggerating at all. The inner 3 rings were occupied by the 3 great sects. They had colonized part of the mountain range. The exercise appeared to be for the benefit of the planet, so the sects could better defend the planet. But their true objective was to imprison the royal family and exert pressure on the royalty. The outer 4th to 8th rings were occupied by smaller sects. The nearer one was to the inner rings, the richer the spirit chi, and the more ideal their location. The Holy Crest Sect was located on the 5th ring. Most of their buildings were crafted from black ink soil, a type of soil that had the ability to absorb spirit chi and form spirit stones. Both had been a result of the hard work of Holy Crest sect pioneers. Outside the sect's gate stood an enormous statue. It towered thousands of feet and was crafted from spirit stones that had been compressed to their limits. Wang Baoli couldn't help but gasp when he saw the statue. It was beyond anything he had seen in the solar system. And this is just a minor sect? Wang Baoli blinked. Long Nanzi's memories told him that the Holy Crest sect wasn't only a small sect, it was currently facing some troubles. The statue before Wang Baoli's eyes seemed to tell another story though. He had no idea of its worth, but he was sure that the money earned from selling it would definitely help the sect tide through its current financial crisis. Questions filled Wang Baoli's head as he continued racing towards the Holy Crest sect. As he approached, he stared at the enormous statue again, then licked his lips. After, he turned towards the sect. Black buildings, palaces big and small, in the thousands, filled his sight. The sect was the combined size of 3 upper academy islands of the ethereal Tao College. Its population was almost pitiful though. He could see 100 or more people bustling around in the distance. Beyond that, there didn't seem to be many more people. It gave the impression that the entire sect only consisted of those 100 or so people. Wang Baoli watched as they hurried along in their own affairs, a strange look settling on his face. He suddenly understood what Long Nanzi's memories had been describing regarding the sect's current situation. Because, almost everyone in the sect was tearing down their residences at great speed. They appeared practiced at this and were dismantling the buildings into their basic components without damaging anything in the process. There were frequent cheers rising in the air, sounding like words of encouragement. "Come on, guys. Today's the last day. We must dismantle the remaining 300 houses with the most valuable building materials. Let's work together to overcome this challenge. Let's complete the mission our sect has assigned us. Tomorrow morning, the Grand Supreme Elder will begin the auction. All bidders will have 2 hours to tear down any building they want. We have to dismantle the most valuable ones now. We can't leave those to the bidders." Cheers continued to resound in the air. As they did, Wang Baoli stood frozen to the spot, stunned. It took him a while before he understood what was going on. The sect had reached a state of poverty where the Grand Supreme Elder had no choice but to auction off parts of the sect's assets. It wasn't a fixed auction with designated auction items though, it was a timed auction. The number of participants and their levels of cultivation were restricted. They were also forbidden from using their storage bags to store anything. During the predetermined duration, save for certain specified items, these participants were allowed to take away anything that was in the sect. Tomorrow was the first day of the auction, which was why the Grand Supreme Elder had ordered the disciples to tear down the buildings with the most value before the auction. What's going on here? Wang Baoli rubbed his forehead. He contemplated whether he should switch his current identity for someone else's. It was then that someone noticed his arrival and shouted at him. "Long Nanzi, you're back. Quick, come and help. The Grand Supreme Elder's handing out rewards. For every building torn down during the time he specified, every participant will be given a superior grade spirit stone." Wang Baoli smiled wryly. It wouldn't be appropriate for him to leave now. He flew over and joined the group dismantling the buildings. He was an expert in refining artifacts and had absorbed Long Nanzi's memories, so it took him only a brief period of observation to learn the ropes quickly. It wasn't his best work, but at least he wasn't lagging behind the others. Wang Baoli couldn't help his surprise during the process of dismantling though. The buildings might appear to be a singular entity, but it had actually been pieced together from different parts. It was like a composite artifact formed from numerous smaller components. They weren't held together by inscriptions but by numerous energy threads. That caught Wang Baoli's interest. He began chatting with the cultivators around him, finding out more about the sect and the Divine Eye civilization's current state of affairs, while examining the fascinating buildings that resembled artifacts. "They're like the dharmic armaments that I found on the 3 unlucky idiots. There are no inscriptions on them. They don't need a spirit stone to serve as a core component either. They are fueled directly by a stellar source. This civilization is very skilled in refining artifacts. Their approach may be different from the Federation's, but the principles seem to be the same. Wang Baoli concluded. Then, he remembered the tricolored flying sword and ribbon that he had acquired. The sword had been destroyed, and while he still had the ribbon, it was in a severely damaged state. Wang Baoli had thought of repairing it, but there was a problem. He had decoded its core and introduced inscriptions. The inscriptions had then served as strings to a puppet that had allowed him to control the two artifacts. Without prior knowledge of how the artifacts actually functioned, it would be challenging to repair them. But now, as he continued to dismantle the buildings around him, Wang Baoli's eyes began to glow increasingly brighter. He could feel the gates of knowledge swinging wide open before him. He had been considering whether he should switch to another identity, but that thought vanished from his mind completely then. Wang Baoli poured even more effort into the work. They finally completed their mission late into the night. They had dismantled hundreds of buildings with the greatest value and gotten themselves hundreds of spirit stones in return. Relying on the knowledge he had gained from reading the high officials' autobiographies and his experience honed from years of mingling with Federation officials, Wang Baoli had a few words with a few people and successfully mapped out his network of friends and enemies. He then made his way to the Holy Crest sect's library. There, he exchanged the spirit stones he had earned for volumes of documents regarding the refinement of artifacts and bought himself a star map. It should have cost a fortune, but the sect was in desperate need of money now, so everything was heavily discounted. After paying the required number of spirit stones, Wang Baoli grabbed his loot and hurriedly looked for an unoccupied residence. Then, he began studying furiously. Days went by. During this period, the auction took place. It was like a storm. The sect became emptied of most of its possessions after days of auctioning. Wang Baoli had been forced to relocate himself a few times. Nevertheless, it seemed that the Holy Crest sect managed to survive its current crisis. While not all disciples who had been out during this period returned, there were at least a few hundred of them who did. The Grand Supreme Elder declared that he would lead the sect to prosperity and power again. It was then that Wang Baoli finished flipping through the records and studying the star map. His eyes had grown increasingly brighter during this time. By the end of it all, his breathing had quickened considerably as well. I was right. I'm not far from the solar system. As long as I play my cards right, I can definitely send my avatar back to take over the presidential office. Chapter 734, An Earnest Heart. Chapter 734, An Earnest Heart. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. What he had to get his hands on in order to leave the Divine Eye star system and return to the solar system was a Divine Eye battleship. After spending some time going through the records, Wang Baoli had gained quite a bit of knowledge about the Divine Eye civilization. He knew that it was a civilization that ran on pillage and robbery. That defining feature of this civilization led to their special regard for battleships. The civilization's progress depended on how much travel and banditry their people did. It was their culture. It meant that even though solo missions occurred from time to time, most of the time, the people of the Divine Eye civilization gathered in swarms, like bees. They traveled and attacked in a group. This gave rise to the need for battleships that could travel at high speeds and for vast distances. As a result, the research and development of battleships became a primary focus for the Divine Eye civilization. They may call it a battleship, but it's really a battle fortress that's not only many times more powerful than the fortress I built in the solar system, but is also many times faster than the lunar stronghold. Wang Baoli's heart raced with excitement. He thought about how he could also achieve space travel if he activated his Thirarch armor and stellar nascent soul. However, it would take too long for him to get back to the solar system. He wouldn't be able to take a break during the journey either. In addition, there were bound to be many unexpected obstacles along the way. A fortress that was fast enough and sturdy enough, and possessed powerful offensive capabilities and navigational power, was exactly what he needed. Wang Baoli took a deep breath at that thought. His eyes shone brightly. No one from the Divine Eye civilization would understand the determination in his eyes, but if Li Xingguan or Duan Muke were here now, they would know exactly what he was feeling. These feelings were the strong desire to return to the solar system and to become the Federation president. Wang Baoli thought about how far he had come from his youthful days and how he still wasn't the Federation president. He couldn't control the emotions stirring inside him. In the past, I couldn't become the Federation president because I was too good-looking, and I also coincidentally didn't have the prerequisite rank. I've gone through so much trouble to slim down in order to hide my natural good looks. I've also climbed the ranks. The Federation president has been within my reach, but my senior brother has taken me away from it. Now, the only thing stopping me from becoming the Federation president is my not having a battleship. The expression on Wang Baoli's face was serious. He raised his right hand, and with a wave, he yanked a pack of chips from his storage bracelet and began munching noisily. He seemed to be trying to prove the strength of his determination with the strength of his bite. He crunched hard on the chips, transforming his resolute will and his strong bite into one. I'm going to become the Federation president. Wang Baoli bit into his chips and promised himself. He hadn't completely lost his senses though. He stopped himself from finishing the entire pack and stored the pack still half filled with chips away. He had prepared for the long journey away from Earth and stored almost 1,000 cartons of snacks of all kinds in his storage bag. But who knew how long he was going to be here? Wang Baoli thought he should be more cautious and ration his snacks. I'll have to plan carefully what to do next. Wang Baoli rubbed his chin and began to think. Since he had a goal in mind, he should work towards that goal. In his opinion, there were a few ways he could get his hands on a battleship. He could use someone else's or build his own. If he chose the first option, he could consider commandeering a sea glutton. It would be easier for him, he just needed enough money. He might face some difficulty in acquiring some cash, but Wang Baoli felt that if he put his mind to it, this was a problem that could be easily resolved. Wang Baoli wasn't confident of how well other people's battleships might work though. He was planning to leave the Divine I-Star system, after all. He might encounter numerous obstacles during his journey back home. Wang Baoli needed to be able to repair the battleship when the situation called for it. After weighing the pros and cons of each option, Wang Baoli came to a decision. I'm going to learn how to build a battleship and build my own. I'll know the ins and outs of the entire battleship then, and I'll be able to repair it if anything goes wrong. This might be challenging for others, but not for Wang Baoli. He was a Dharmic armament master who could craft 8th grade Dharmic armaments. He was still some way from successfully crafting a 9th grade Dharmic armament, but he had no problems repairing one. After gaining an understanding of the Dharmic armament system in the Divine Eye civilization, he was confident in his success. He just needed to learn how to do it in the first place. In the days that followed, Wang Baoli did what he had been doing, leaning furiously. The Holy Crest sect didn't have a big disciple population. Even though only 600 or so of them remained in the sect during this period, they all knew each other rather well. Wang Baoli's lessons were often interrupted by visitors. Wang Baoli couldn't turn these people away since they had been Long Nanzi's friends. Besides, he was interested in learning more from them as well. Wang Baoli welcomed each visitor with great enthusiasm. As they fretted over the sect's current situation and its uncertain future, Wang Baoli tried to find out more about the Holy Crest sect and the Divine I-Star system. When will the Greater Sect be visiting? I have no idea. Everyone's trying to decide whether they should remain with the sect now. The Thousand Spirit sect approached many of our disciples. The perks that they're offering seem quite good. They're asking us to join them. The news from these visitors revealed the anxieties these disciples were feeling. There had been 2 incidents during all these visits, where Long Nanzi's closer friends seemed to suspect something was amiss with him. It was a piece of cake for Wang Baoli to deal with such matters though. He had used his powerful cultivation to cast a spell and influence their minds. Life went on without a hitch. The Grand Supreme Elder had summoned for him once. He had asked some simple questions about his progress with his cultivation. He hadn't paid much attention to Long Nanzi, who had been stuck and hadn't achieved a breakthrough in cultivation for a number of years. As a result, he naturally hadn't realized that Long Nanzi had been replaced with another person. Other than a few words of encouragement, he had simply left Wang Baoli with a few casual words before he sent him away. These are difficult times for the sect. We need everyone to chip in. That is the only way the sect can restore itself to its former power and continue to offer protection to all its disciples. Those words appeared to mean nothing on the surface. Besides, the Grand Supreme Elder hadn't only summoned Wang Baoli, he had summoned every core formation realm cultivator who had continued training independently despite the sect's current situation. The Grand Supreme Elder had offered the same words of encouragement, then left them with the same parting words. After all, the sect was in a dire position now. Most of its physical assets had been torn down and taken over by other sects. The sect grounds looked barren. It was a sad sight to bear. As the elder, encouraging the disciples and easing their worries was the right thing to do. But Wang Baoli had immersed himself in the high officials' autobiographies since he had been a child. He had climbed the ranks to the top in the solar system. He continued to ponder the Grand Supreme Elder's words after he left the meeting. Is this a threat? Wang Baoli laughed. He decided to ignore it. He had remained calm throughout the meeting, unworried that he would be exposed. The concealed threat didn't faze him at all. Even if the Grand Supreme Elder were to find out his true identity or decide to cause him trouble, he could simply kill the middle-aged man and take on his identity. It was then that he realized that if he were to transform into the Grand Supreme Elder, he would have to deal with a new set of problems. There was the Grand Supreme Elder's social network, his dealings with the greater sect, as well as administrative matters within the sect itself. He could search the Grand Supreme Elder's soul for information, but there wasn't that wide a gap between their levels of cultivation. Even if he succeeded in searching the man's soul, he wouldn't be able to acquire complete information. Besides, the Grand Supreme Elder didn't seem to notice anything wrong with Wang Baoli. That was why Wang Baoli decided to abandon the idea of taking on the Grand Supreme Elder's identity after some thought. So be it. I'll spare his life. Wang Baoli coughed. He returned to his residence and continued his study on the Divine Eye Civilization's artifact refinement techniques. In the blink of an eye, 7 days passed. Wang Baoli's continued interaction with the sect disciples was a boon to him. He finally assimilated into the sect. The place was no longer as foreign to him as it had been initially. As he continued asking around, he also found out the reason behind the disaster that had befallen the sect and why it had to auction off its assets. Everything led back to the battleship that the Holy Crest sect had been using for raids and was now trying to repair. This battleship was the sect's most valuable possession. Its construction had taken a few generations to complete. Vast resources had gone into the construction of the battleship, and it was the key to the Holy Crest sect's continued survival. That was why the Grand Supreme Elder had auctioned off the sect's assets and bought vast quantities of materials. He had also gathered every cultivator in the sect who was an expert in refining artifacts and sent them to the sect's restricted zone, where they carried out repairs to the battleship without rest. Wang Baoli couldn't help but be tempted upon that discovery. The studies that he had done in seclusion could only bring him theoretical knowledge. As a master in dharmic armaments, Wang Baoli knew how important getting his hands dirty was. In addition, if he could somehow get himself involved in the repairs of the battleship, it would help him gain a better understanding of how to begin to build his own. He reorganized the information he had learned about how the Divine Eye civilization refined its artifacts, then he left his residence and headed for the restricted zone. The Grand Supreme Elder was supervising the repair work there, so Wang Baoli was going to see the Grand Supreme Elder and volunteer to help with the repairs of the battleship. Grand Supreme Elder, as a member of the Holy Crest sect, I can't just sit by as the sect is suffering. My mind won't let me rest and focus on my cultivation. I want to volunteer to help with the battleship's repairs. I wish to contribute my services to the sect. This is everything I've saved up, I'm willing to hand everything to the sect for its use. I'd like to offer whatever labor I can provide as well. I swear to stand with the sect in both glory and death. Wang Baoli waited for a long moment before he was finally granted a meeting with the Grand Supreme Elder. When he saw the tired-looking Grand Supreme Elder, Wang Baoli immediately pulled out a storage bag and placed it at one side. Then, he began to speak with a loud, excited voice, proclaiming his loyalty to the sect, like it was clear for all to see. Perhaps to make his proclamation more authentic, Wang Baoli smacked his chest loudly. Chapter 735, The Holy Crest Sect's Opportunity? Chapter 735, The Holy Crest Sect's Opportunity? Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Calm down, Long Nanzi, the Grand Supreme Elder of the Holy Crest Sect narrowed his eyes. He was pleased with what Wang Baoli had said. The sect was going through a difficult time, and he himself was under extreme stress as well. Most of the sect disciples' loyalty appeared to be tested. Even if he were to speak to them individually and give them words of encouragement, it wouldn't improve the situation much. Wang Baoli was the first to have offered both his services and his resources. Grand Supreme Elder. Wang Baoli raised his head suddenly. There was red in his eyes, and he looked like he was in pain as he spoke loudly. I can't calm down. I've not been eating or sleeping well for the past few days. When I'm awake, all I can think about is the troubles that are plaguing the sect. When I shut my eyes, all I can see is the sect's uncertain future. I kept telling myself that our great Grand Supreme Elder will lead us out of these difficult times. But I just can't sit by and continue deceiving myself into inaction while the entire sect is in trouble. Grand Supreme Elder, please allow me to participate in the repair efforts of the battleship. I've bled for the sect in the past, so what's a little sweat and toil now? Wang Baoli said excitedly. He cupped his fists once again and gave the Grand Supreme Elder a deep bow. The Grand Supreme Elder sucked in a deep breath of air and studied Wang Baoli for a long moment. There was praise and comfort in his eyes. Then, the Grand Supreme Elder nodded. Wang Baoli watched as the Grand Supreme Elder opened his mouth, about to say something. What came from his lips was a long string of complicated words, a curse. The halls shuddered violently, and a blinding light that was as bright as an eternal stars appeared and enveloped Wang Baoli suddenly. Wang Baoli was unfazed. He had thought this through clearly before he had come here, and he knew that what he had said contradicted Long Nan's true character to a certain extent. Getting the battleship repaired and restored was extremely important to the sect, so he had expected the Grand Supreme Elder to search him. This wasn't an issue though. He might be acting out of character, but his actions were still within the realm of possibility. Wang Baoli believed that his actions were something the Grand Supreme Elder had wanted to see. There was no other explanation for the latter's earlier concealed threat. In addition, he was confident in the essence technique that his senior brother had given him. He pretended to look stunned, as if he hadn't yet reacted to the curse. The Grand Supreme Elder pressed his hands together in a series of hand seals, and his eyes shone with an unfathomable light as he unleashed some form of mystic technique and searched Wang Baoli. The inspection didn't take long. After 10 seconds, the intense light in the Grand Supreme Elder's eyes faded away. He smiled, then gave Wang Baoli permission to enter the restricted zone and help with the repairs. Wang Baoli left excitedly, the look on his face showing his strong desire to do his part for the sect. As he walked out of the hall, the smile on the Grand Supreme Elder's face vanished. In its place was a cold, calculating look. He grabbed Wang Baoli's storage bag and began inspecting its contents. The resources he has given aren't exactly that valuable, but at least he's a smart man who offered his services without me having to force his hand. Besides, he's the first person to approach me. There's potential in grooming him. As for the others, they continue to train independently and show no signs of offering any help to the sect. They pretend not to have heard my words. An icy glint flashed across the Grand Supreme Elder's eyes. He was prepared to wait a few more days. If these people didn't come forward, he would have no choice but to sell them to another sect that specialized in refining servant puppets in exchange for resources to repair the battleship. Many core formation realm cultivators chose to continue their cultivation in isolation in the sect. While this would have been something Wang Baoli would have done in the past, he was now happily making his way from his own residence and towards the restricted zone. The Holy Crest sect's restricted zone was a separate space that spanned hundreds of kilometers. There weren't many cultivators inside, only 300 to 400 of them. It should have been a vast space, but the presence of the battleship overshadowed everything else. The battleship floated in the center of the restricted zone and was surrounded by numerous array formations unknown to Wang Baoli. They dazzled in an array of colors and appeared to be fueling the battleship with spirit chi. The Holy Crest sect's battleship was in the shape of a cross, with two long rectangles spanning 5,000 kilometers intersecting perpendicularly in the middle. It was red, alarmingly bright while exuding a dangerous vibe. It was damaged in multiple locations. Some parts of its interior seemed to have been emptied completely and were left with nothing but a vacant exterior. Regardless, the battleship's sheer size still made it a terrifying sight to behold. Its threatening aura made Wang Baoli gasp. The Holy Crest sect is only a small sect. To think that the battleship for such a small sect is so powerful. Wang Baoli's eyes shone with an intense light as excitement sparked inside him. He immediately joined the team on the battleship's repairs. His arrival didn't attract much attention at first, as everyone was busy with repairs and had their own tasks to carry out. Some had to break down the raw materials into something usable, while some had to craft new components for the battleship. Some were even tasked to assemble or dismantle parts, and clean up or create more energy threads. There were even those tasked with repairing the offensive dharmic artifacts on the battleship. The tasks occupied everyone's time and attention. Wang Baoli's first task was to deal with components that made up the exterior of the battleship, and had been reported as damaged beyond repair. He was to inspect every component assigned to his station, identify damaged components, and send them to the respective teams responsible for dismantling these components into potentially reusable parts. It wasn't a difficult task, simply tedious. He labored like a worker at the factory, moving components from place to place without stopping. Wang Baoli didn't find it hard work though. In fact, he enjoyed it. The inspection helped reinforce his earlier lessons on the Divine Eye civilization's dharmic armament system. He would glean whatever practical experience he could from each inspection, then send the components to the relevant teams. He tried to appear enthusiastic, wanting to get to know the team and learn more while secretly observing what they were doing. 2 weeks passed in this manner. Wang Baoli had fully mastered his task at this point and no longer needed to send certain components to the relevant teams. Instead, he did the repairs himself. This boosted his efficiency greatly. It also refined his proficiency at refining armaments. Wang Baoli didn't waste the additional time saved from his increased efficiency. He began to help other disciples with their repairs. He had established a cordial relationship at the onset. That, along with the fact that there was simply too much work to be done, meant that everyone welcomed his help. Wang Baoli was soon doing the work of two. As a dharmic armament master, the practical experience that Wang Baoli continued to gain during the process quickly allowed him to master the Divine Eye civilization's refinement techniques. His proficiency at refining armaments improved rapidly, and it was evident in the speed he was repairing the battleship's armaments. His efficiency got another boost. A few components that should have been sent to teams in charge of more advanced repairs were successfully repaired at Wang Baoli's station. The other disciples in the smaller repair teams were astounded by his performance. Everyone looked at Wang Baoli with respect and admiration. With Wang Baoli's perfected core formation realm cultivation and relatively high rank, he was soon being treated as the leader of the small team of 7 to 8 people. During the entire process, Wang Baoli's understanding of the inner workings of the Holy Crest sect battleship deepened. Battleships in the Divine Eye civilization are categorized by their belts. First belt battleships are the least powerful and sixth belt battleships the most powerful. Legends speak of 7th belt and 8th belt battleships too. Due to certain reasons, the Holy Crest sect is allowed to possess battleships at a relatively high level. This battleship appears to be a 4th belt battleship. 4th belt battleships are typically divided into 300 sectors, with each sector having a different function. The entire battleship is a finely tuned machine. Every sector is required to perform properly for the battleship to run smoothly. There are more than 10,000 primary dharmic artifacts in each sector. Bigger sectors would have more. This complex structure gives the battleship its great traveling speed when it's been activated. It has the capability to cross star systems. It also possesses tremendous offensive capabilities. The excitement in Wang Baoli grew as he learned more about the battleship. There's also a core sector that acts like both the heart and brain of the battleship. It's the most important sector in the entire battleship. Wang Baoli lifted his head and stared at the center of the battleship as it floated in the air. That should be where the central sector lay. However, only 7 people in the entire Holy Crest sect had access to it. Everyone else wasn't even allowed to stand anywhere near the sector. One of them was the early-stage Soul Condorit Realm Grand Supreme Elder. The rest were the only 6 nascent Soul Realm Elders in the sect. If I want to fully understand the complete structure of the battleship, I'll have to get inside and get involved in the interior's repairs. I'll need to find a way into the core sector. Maybe I can try killing a nascent Soul Realm cultivator and taking over his identity. Wang Baoli narrowed his eyes and began considering the pros and cons of his idea. He wasn't given the luxury to think it through fully though. His team had performed exceedingly well in their repair work, and the lack of manpower in the sect meant that their exemplary work quickly caught the attention of others. That included the nascent Soul Realm Elder in charge of the teams repairing battleship components. Long Nanzi? I didn't realize he had such talents. A late bloomer, perhaps? The Elder didn't give it too much thought. Late bloomers were common when it came to refining armaments. With Wang Baoli's relatively high level of cultivation, it didn't take the Elder long before he decided to transfer Wang Baoli to work on the battleship's interior. He was to join a more advanced team. Wang Baoli blinked upon receiving his assignment. He placed the component in his hands aside and sighed secretly. This Holy Crest sect really isn't a bad place at all. I'm going to feel bad about what I'm going to do, so be it. Perhaps my very appearance is the result of the karma the Holy Crest sect has accumulated over 1,000 years. Chapter 736, Putting Me in My Place? Chapter 736, Putting Me in My Place? Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. How envious I am of the Holy Crest sect, to be able to come across someone as intelligent and amazing as I am. Wang Baoli coughed. He left the team with a sense of superiority unfurling within him, and headed for the interior of the battleship as the nascent Soul Realm Elder had instructed. The repairs of the battleship were divided into two parts, exterior and interior. The battleship's exterior required quite extensive repairs, but the level of expertise necessary wasn't especially high. The repairs of the battleship's interior was a different matter. Security was more stringent as well. Wang Baoli had to go through 5 array formations before he was let in. After he had passed all the inspections, he was teleported directly into the battleship. Wang Baoli saw the cultivator who was to be his guide. He was a middle-aged man who appeared to be at the early stage core formation realm. He immediately stepped forward and cupped his fists in greeting when he saw Wang Baoli. Greetings, Senior Brother Long Nanzi. Many parts of the battleship's interior are still damaged. It can be dangerous walking around if one isn't aware of the parts of the battleship that are still under repair. That's why I've been told to wait here for your arrival and to lead you to Team 7. Long Nanzi was considered a disciple with relatively high status in the Holy Crest sect. Even though he hadn't reached a breakthrough in cultivation for many years, he was still at the perfected core formation realm. Despite his lack of talent in refining armaments, he still garnered some degree of respect from other disciples. Wang Baoli responded to the other cultivator's courteous manner with a smile. Due to Long Nanzi's naturally thin lips, his smile appeared cold and slightly unfriendly. It made the middle-aged cultivator feel slightly uncomfortable. He cautiously led Wang Baoli to their destination and did his best to answer Wang Baoli's questions. The answers Wang Baoli got from the cultivator gave him a greater understanding of Team 7. There were 41 teams working on the battleship, and the repair work was divided up clearly amongst the teams. However, due to the lack of manpower, each team also had to handle other repair work that fell beyond their scope of duties. These teams were overseen by 9 teams. The latter supervised the teams under their purview while taking care of more advanced and important repairs. The team that he was going to join, Team 7, was responsible for the battleship's defense system. Their scope of work required a higher level of proficiency in armament refinement. There were 19 members in the team. Instead of working together like the groups repairing the battleship's exterior, every disciple in Team 7 had their own workstation where they completed their tasks independently. Besides the daily tasks assigned to them, these disciples could also check the list of outstanding repairs during their spare time and perform whatever repairs or refinements were required. To increase efficiency and autonomy, the Holy Crest sect would give out credits for work done that could then be exchanged for materials required for cultivation. This proved to be an incentive in such times when resources were scarce. As they journeyed through the battleship, Wang Baoli took note of the interior of the battleship. Inside the vast space were numerous dharmic artifacts that formed part of the battleship's structure. In addition, there were also some living organisms that had fused together with the walls of the battleship. Interesting. Wang Baoli's eyes narrowed. The literature he had read hadn't spoken about fusion spells that could fuse living organisms with dharmic artifacts. His own experience told him instantly that such fusions could greatly enhance the battleship's capabilities. His interest towards the Divine Eye civilization's dharmic armament system intensified. The middle-aged man led Wang Baoli through the battleship. It took an hour for them to reach the sector where Team 7 was located. The sector resembled a bee's hive, with dozens of small rooms clustered together. The open square that surrounded the rooms was cluttered with piles of damaged components and materials. A young cultivator stood in the square, barking out orders to the other cultivators. They recorded each material in their possession and sent them into the rooms. Send this third belt compass to senior brother Chen Luo. Tell junior brother Li Fang that the Roy Pearl he just repaired isn't up to standard. If he doesn't fix it, he can get out of Team 7. There's still use for this void-piercing ore. Send it to Lu Mingfei. He has a day to extract the void-piercing stones inside. I want at least 70% of the stones out. The young cultivator was at the late-stage core formation realm. He seemed to be a master at refining armaments. He only needed a single glance at the materials or artifacts in order to identify the problem with the item. He was curt, and his words filled with impatience. He threw a dharmic artifact over to another cultivator and instructed the latter on what to do with it. It was then that he noticed Wang Baoli's arrival. He lifted his head, frowning slightly as his eyes fell on Wang Baoli. Greetings to senior brother Li Chen. The moment the young man's eyes fell on them, the middle-aged cultivator next to Wang Baoli trembled and stepped forward. He cupped his fists and gave Li Chen a deep bow. His attitude towards Li Chen was more respectful and deferential than what he had displayed towards Wang Baoli. Wang Baoli finally recognized who stood before him. Long Nanzi's memories pinned him as the disciple under the Fifth Elder's personal guidance. He was gifted at armament refinement and considered a prodigy in the Holy Crest sect. Their social circles didn't intersect with one another, generally. Now that Wang Baoli had seen Li Chen, he couldn't help the sudden idea that popped up in his head. He assessed the feasibility of transforming into this person. Now wasn't the right time to strike, but the gears in Wang Baoli's head spun furiously. He decided to set this idea aside for the moment. Just as Wang Baoli shelved his idea of killing the young man, the latter, who had no idea he had just escaped death, waved his arm. He didn't spare a glance at the middle-aged cultivator who had greeted him. Instead, he glared at Wang Baoli impatiently, then said angrily, "You're late, Long Nanzi. Every second is precious as we work to repair the battleship. Don't repeat this mistake. I'll hand this spirit illusory ore to you. Go and find a station that's unoccupied. You have 24 hours to distill spirit illusory liquid from the ore. There shouldn't be more than 20% wastage." The young man waved his hand and flung a stone at Wang Baoli. It was the size of one's fist and gave off a purple glow. Li Chen ignored Wang Baoli after that and continued to attend to other materials and their treatment. Long Nanzi was of little significance to him. There wasn't a need for him to spend too much time talking to someone like that. If Long Nanzi couldn't complete the task given to him, he'd just have to pack up and leave. Wang Baoli raised one eyebrow as he caught the spirit illusory ore. It was an ore unique to the Divine Eye civilization. He had read about it in the records before. With certain special treatments, the ore could be melted down into a spirit liquid called spirit illusory liquid. The liquid was generally used to increase the success rate of refinements. However, wastage would inevitably occur during the process of melting down the ore. The acceptable range of wastage was 50% and below. 20% was going to be a challenge. Is he trying to put me in my place? Wang Baoli glanced at the youth, then laughed suddenly. He had never been the sort of person to take things lying down. Besides, he was in his avatar form now with his true form safely hidden in the coffin. If things went south, he could take on another identity immediately. He wasn't planning to cause trouble if no one caused trouble for him, but should someone offend him, Wang Baoli wasn't going to simply let them go. He didn't care who it was, even if it were the Grand Supreme Elder of the Holy Crest sect. Wang Baoli flipped the hand that was holding the spirit illusory ore, and a blue flame flared inside his palm and enveloped the ore. The technique to melt down the ore appeared in Wang Baoli's head. Even though this was his first time doing it, his talent and solid foundation in armament refinement allowed him to master the technique almost instantly. The fire in his palm grew increasingly hotter, and its color began to change rapidly. The sight caught everyone's attention. Unhappiness flashed across Li Chen's eyes, and he turned around, his eyes cold. However, the look on his face soon shifted to shock. Spirit illusory ore can be melted down by alchemical fire. Between each count, the fire will undergo 696 cycles and change colors 233 times. By ensuring that the rate of burning is apace with one's breathing, we can introduce spirit qi and further nourishment to the melting process, ensuring a successful distillation. During the process, we'll have to watch out for any inscriptions that may appear as cracks on the ore and adjust the heat accordingly. Even though zero wastage cannot be achieved, theoretically speaking, we can reduce wastage to something approaching zero. Wang Baoli explained coolly as he refined the ore. Of course, that is beyond my humble means. What I can do is, to reduce wastage to 10%. Wang Baoli continued casually. Everyone around him, including the middle-aged cultivator, watched with astonishment as he waved his right hand and extinguished the flames. A ball of liquid exuding a strange purple light appeared above his palm. It was a purple, clear liquid that sparkled like treasure. Everyone was drawn to it subconsciously. This was Spirit Illusory Liquid. My God, this is supreme-grade Spirit Illusory Liquid. The middle-aged cultivator standing next to Wang Baoli gasped. Shock descended upon the public square. Chapter 737, Hi, we meet again. Chapter 737, Hi, we meet again. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. The crowd wasn't only shocked by the fact that Wang Baoli had just refined supreme-grade Spirit Illusory Liquid, they were also shocked by how short a time it took him to accomplish it. The entire refinement process took but 30 counts. The latter in itself would have blown anyone's mind. But he hadn't only managed to complete the refinement within a short period, he had managed to refine supreme-grade Spirit Illusory Liquid. The feat had overthrown everything they had known about refinement. Amidst their incredulity, they had forgotten about Li Chen's presence and gasped aloud in shock. Li Chen himself was placed in a rough spot of embarrassment. He was equally shocked as well. He too might have been able to refine Spirit Illusory Liquid with only a 10% wastage, but he would have taken 3 days. Long Nanzi, on the other hand, had managed to accomplish the feat within seconds. The level of their foundational abilities was worlds apart. That was a hard pill to swallow and a burn to his pride. He found it hard to control his rage and humiliation. Before he could say anything though, Wang Baoli shook his head. I'm still unfamiliar with this since it's my first time doing it. That's why I had 10% wastage, he sighed, appearing dissatisfied with his results. With a wave of his right hand, Wang Baoli flung the Spirit Illusory Liquid to Li Chen. What others treated as precious, he seemed to treat as mere trash. Then, without sparing Li Chen a glance, he found an unoccupied chamber in a deserted area and went over. Wang Baoli's words were like a divine power, landing a direct hit on Li Chen. It was an attack that inflicted collateral damage, no one around him was spared. The area descended into sudden silence. People parted as Wang Baoli walked towards them. It was as if they were in the presence of a deity. They stepped back with utmost deference and cleared a path for Wang Baoli. They had witnessed his refinement and heard his words, and he seemed to exude the aura of a mighty cultivator, a presence that everyone could sense distinctly, one that was immensely powerful. Wang Baoli disappeared as he entered the chamber, but the public square remained steeped in silence. It was a while before the sound of breathing was heard. As for Li Chen, his chest was heaving heavily, his face pale one moment and dark the next. He finally lifted his head and started yelling at everyone around him. What are you all doing? Get back to work. Someone, take this illusory theft pillar to senior brother Long Nanzi. This fallen star compass, and that phoenix feather, and that stone ink beast, send them all to senior brother Long Nanzi. Li Chen said with a thunderous look on his face. Exploiting his authority, he chose more than 30 components that were clearly the most challenging to repair and got them all sent over to Wang Baoli. He thought viciously, so, you're great at this, aren't you? Fine, let's see whether you can repair these components then. Everyone lowered their heads and went about carrying out the orders given. No one appeared to have any opinions about what was going on. In their view, this was a fight between two powerful cultivators and not something they should be involved in. They followed their orders and took the materials, as well as the dharmic artifacts requiring repair, to Wang Baoli's chamber. Other cultivators would have been extremely unhappy when faced with such bullying. Such repairs were considered part of their work and wouldn't earn any additional rewards. After all, additional rewards were only given for repairs done for components identified on the list, outside of one's normal scope of work. Wang Baoli wasn't displeased though. In fact, he was extremely willing to take on the work. What he lacked was practice. The repairs assigned to him ensured that he didn't need to worry about a lack of resources or materials for refinement. He welcomed each repair assigned to him and began repairing the parts at a furious pace. His focus wasn't on the repairs though, it was on dismantling the components and studying their internal structure. With his rich knowledge and experience in refinement, he became a sponge that soaked up everything he learned swiftly. That continued for the next few days. He also joined a team, which gave him the added benefit of being able to access more knowledge on refining artifacts. The restoration of the battleship was of the utmost priority to the Holy Crest sect. However, the sect was constrained by their lack of manpower. In order to increase the speed of repair, certain literature on artifact refinement, which would have been restricted to blood relatives in the sect, was now being made partially accessible to the members of the 9 repair teams. Time passed steadily. 3 months went by. Wang Baoli's advancement in the area of artifact refinement during this period was astonishing. The merging and amalgamation of 2 different refinement systems from 2 different civilizations inspired many great ideas. He immersed himself in the craft, oftentimes forgetting about his intention to return to the solar system. The feeling that his proficiency in refining artifacts was improving every day brought Wang Baoli a sense of joy that was exhilarating. This sense of bliss was further enhanced when a casual attempt showed that he could now successfully craft a 9th-grade dharmic armament. He was no longer as lost when it came to the refinement of divine armaments. The revelation made his spirits soar. He didn't try to hide his improvement. Even if he had thought of doing so, it would have been a challenging feat. Everyone in Team 7 was familiar with his name. In fact, the work that he was churning out was the equivalent of the work the rest of the team was doing. Li Chen had given up on making life difficult for him a week ago. He had finally realized that Long Nanzi and himself were worlds apart. Long Nanzi had improved vastly. Li Chen's initial bullying might have had some effect, slowing down his speed and accuracy when it came to repairing the battleship's components, but its impact had been temporary. Li Chen had been forced to rack his brains and select even more challenging tasks for Long Nanzi. These tasks would make Wang Baoli's life difficult for the first few days, but after that, they would no longer pose a challenge to him. Li Chen would be driven mad with frustration and would furiously search for something else to make Wang Baoli's life harder. He had even gone to the extent of reaching out to other teams with the excuse of helping them out. However, anything that he threw at Wang Baoli would only hold Wang Baoli's attention for a few days. In the end, Li Chen had been the one to come away psychologically traumatized by the experience. He stopped making life difficult for Wang Baoli, though the latter didn't appear to be pleased with his sudden change of attitude. Wang Baoli's impression of Li Chen had grown increasingly more positive as the days went by. Li Chen's antics were a blessing in disguise. If he hadn't searched for challenging repairs across all teams, Wang Baoli wouldn't have improved as quickly as he had. Wang Baoli panicked when he realized that Li Chen had abandoned his antics. He approached Li Chen directly and had a serious and heartfelt conversation with the latter. That appeared to spark Li Chen's spirit. Li Chen made a show of his extreme helpfulness and widened the scope of his search, going to extremes to help Wang Baoli. This aid persisted for 2 months before Li Chen caved in. No matter how earnestly Wang Baoli spoke to Li Chen, it was to no avail. Li Chen seemed on the verge of tears. He approached his master and requested to be transferred out of Team 7. Wang Baoli was sorry to see Li Chen's departure. When he found out that Li Chen had been transferred to Team 5, he happily went over to Team 5 in search of Li Chen the next day. He began work there. He was once again showered with challenging repairs. 2 weeks later, Li Chen transferred to Team 3. Wang Baoli happily followed his friend to the team. Li Chen transferred to Team 1 a week later. Wang Baoli became excited and followed hastily in Li Chen's footsteps. Li Chen was stunned to find Wang Baoli standing before him. "Hi." Wang Baoli blinked and waved excitedly at Li Chen. Li Chen left that day. This time, he left the battleship's interior altogether. He went to work on repairs on the battleship's exterior. Wang Baoli was sad to see him go. If not for the friendship that he had developed with Li Chen during this period, he would very much have liked to kill him on the spot and take over the latter's identity. "We're friends. I can't do that to a friend." Wang Baoli sighed as he watched Li Chen leave. Then, he turned back and returned to Team 1. In the following 3 months, Wang Baoli continued to remain without a designated team. He went from one team to the next, to wherever he was needed. His stellar performance in refinement had caught the attention of the Holy Crest Sect's Grand Supreme Elder, and the Sect's 6 nascent Soul Realm Elders. The findings from repeated investigations concluded that nothing was amiss. In the end, they could only explain his sudden advancement in proficiency as the long-awaited growth of a late bloomer. This was a common occurrence in the Divine Eye civilization. However, none had displayed as drastic a change as Wang Baoli. It's a pity that Long Nanzi hasn't been able to reach a breakthrough in his cultivation. The Grand Supreme Elder sighed. He wondered, for the first time, if he should give Long Nanzi a helping hand, pay a small price so that Long Nanzi could forcibly enter the nascent soul realm. The Grand Supreme Elder weighed the pros and cons. At this moment, Wang Baoli had spent 6 months working with numerous teams and had familiarized himself with the internal structure of the battleship. His sights were now set on the battleship's core sector, the sector that could only be accessed by the sect elders. Days later, Wang Baoli made use of his essence technique and staged his breakthrough to the nascent soul realm. His sudden breakthrough caught everyone's attention, and the news of Long Nanzi's advancement to the nascent soul realm soon spread across the entire sect. Chapter 738, The Rules to a Good Robbery. Chapter 738, The Rules to a Good Robbery. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Wang Baoli's breakthrough in cultivation hadn't been particularly impressive in terms of the power displayed during the breakthrough. However, it still managed to create a surge in spirit energy in the restricted zone. Waves of spirit energy flooded the area, sending waves of shock surging through the cultivators working in the battleship. The Grand Supreme Elder and the Sect's 6 nascent Soul Realm Elders were taken aback when they sensed the sudden breakthrough. The Grand Supreme Elder was the first to recover from his shock. He teleported away instantly and appeared in midair, hovering above Team 7. He lowered his head, ignored the members of Team 7, who had rushed away from their stations with surprise on their faces, and allowed his senses to sweep across the area. His senses immediately locked onto the chamber that Wang Baoli was in. The Grand Supreme Elder's eyes widened after his closer inspection. Incredulity colored his eyes. Long Nanzi? He's attained a breakthrough? The Grand Supreme Elder could clearly sense what was happening inside the chamber. Wang Baoli sat inside, his cultivation surging as nascent soul realm spirit energy continued to gather. The Grand Supreme Elder could sense Wang Baoli's golden core cracking and his nascent soul forming rapidly. The Sect's 6 elders arrived one after another. They were equally surprised when they realized that Long Nanzi was the one who was currently in the midst of a breakthrough in cultivation. Long Nanzi had shown limited potential. Despite the opportunity he had come across in his earlier years, he had only managed to reach the core formation realm. The nascent soul realm wasn't technically out of reach for him, but the chances of him actually attaining the nascent soul realm had been slim. They had felt incredulous at first. Then, they gave the idea some more thought. Long Nanzi had shown himself to be a late bloomer in the area of artifact refinement. His sudden improvement in that aspect could have been the catalyst that led to his breakthrough. It was a possibility that shouldn't be discounted. Visit website ourlistnovel.com. Both the Elders and the Grand Supreme Elder had verified Long Nanzi's sudden advancement in artifact refinement. They hadn't managed to find anything amiss with the cultivator. Nothing was out of the ordinary with Long Nanzi. His soul, his physical form, and his aura showed no signs of him being possessed or replaced by someone else. Long Nanzi's breakthrough might have been unexpected, but it was a happy surprise. The emergence of another nascent soul realm cultivator in the sect was a boost to the sect's power and influence. In addition, his skill in artifact refinement was clear for all to see. His skill, his length of service in the sect, and his breakthrough in cultivation would contribute greatly to the repair works of the battleship. The Grand Supreme Elder's eyes shone intensely at that thought. He immediately ordered for the area to be locked down. Everyone in Team 7 was made to leave. Then, he and the remaining 6 elders sat down and stood watch over Wang Baoli. Members of Team 7 didn't waste time, immediately spreading the news of Long Nan's breakthrough. Everyone in the restricted zone soon knew him to be the source of the sudden surge in spirit energy that signified a breakthrough. Shocked gasps and heated discussions could be heard throughout the restricted zone. Some people expressed envy, others expressed jealousy, and many sighed with longing and a tinge of bitterness. The person who was the epitome of bitterness and resentment was Li Chen. Has the divine eye gone blind? Is every Tom, Dick, and Harry going to break through now? Li Chen glared furiously at the battleship floating in the air. He cursed at Wang Baoli, wishing fervently that his breakthrough would fail. But his curses were useless. 3 days later, Wang Baoli ended his cultivation and stepped out of his chamber. The Grand Supreme Elder immediately announced his promotion as the 7th Elder of the sect. Following Wang Baoli's promotion, the Grand Supreme Elder's attitude towards him changed. He was no longer as stern to him as he would be to other disciples. He smiled more at Wang Baoli, as did the other 6 elders. Wang Baoli was familiar with such politics. He had climbed the ranks while he had been in the Federation, rising from the bottom to become a high-ranking official. So, he was skilled in public relations. He responded in kind and established a cordial relationship with the elders. In the days that followed, Wang Baoli went through a series of ceremonies that saw him officially promoted to the position of sect elder. His access rights were modified accordingly. This was something he had been looking forward to. Besides gaining access to classified literature and sect techniques, he also gained the right to enter the battleship's core sector. Wang Baoli directed his focus to the battleship's core sector in the days that followed. Besides studying the sect's classified records and learning more about its refinement techniques, he also attempted to repair the dharmic artifacts in the battleship's core sector. His proficiency in artifact refinement advanced rapidly once again. Repeated experimentation and practice deepened his understanding of the battleship and its construction. His confidence in crafting his own battleship grew as well. In his spare time, Wang Baoli began mentally drafting the blueprints for his battleship. The construction had to be logically sound and had to adhere to the laws governing composite dharmic artifacts. It was going to be a complex blueprint. Despite his skill in the area, it still took him months to come up with a complete blueprint in his head. With the first draft of his blueprint complete, a new problem arose: resources. The Holy Crest sect had to auction off nearly half of its buildings in order to repair its battleship. Wang Baoli, on the other hand, was starting the construction of his battleship with nothing. The resources required to build a battleship from scratch would be immense. In fact, it might be so expensive that it was impossible to put a price tag on the venture. I have to think of a way. Wang Baoli studied the blueprints he had drafted in his head and did a rough calculation of the resources he required. The final figure was a heavy weight on his chest. The stress was immense. If only I could use my good looks to get me the resources I need. This would hardly be a problem. What should I do now? Should I make use of my identity to steal resources? Wang Baoli sighed at the vast amount of resources he was going to need. The gears in his head began moving. The Grand Supreme Elder and the other elders had long acknowledged his new position as one of the sect's elders. He could sense their concealed wariness against him waning. After understanding the nature of the Divine Eye civilization and how it centered around plunder and pillage, Wang Baoli came to another realization. Even though the Grand Supreme Elder and the sect elders appeared friendly, their cordial appearances were just that, appearances. Good men were rare in this civilization. Those who wanted to advance further in their cultivation had to venture out and become bandits. Killing became second nature for them. Wang Baoli might have passed multiple rounds of inspections, but his drastic transformation still incited suspicion. During this period, he had sensed eyes constantly watching him. He had no intention of ruining the sect though. That was why the Grand Supreme Elder and the other elders couldn't find anything wrong with him. If Wang Baoli wanted to, he could secretly divert resources to himself for his own use. His position would make that a convenient solution, but the sect was too poor and lacked sufficient resources. After some thought, Wang Baoli concluded that he would have to drain the sect dry and rob it of its battleship in order for this to work. Anything less wouldn't work. A grown man shouldn't be so fixated on the small stuff. I'll either go big or go home. I shouldn't waste my time with small fry. Wang Baoli coughed and narrowed his eyes. There was a glint in his eyes. The Divine Eye civilization is a big place. There are plenty of rich sects around. Wang Baoli licked his lips. He thought for a bit and made up his mind. He was going to avoid the spying that was still occasionally being done on him over the next few days. He would begin emptying his storage bags and start buying resources secretly. He did exactly what he planned to. Then, one moonless night, Wang Baoli sneaked out from his residence without anyone's notice and appeared in the sky outside the Holy Crest sect. There may be many sects in the Fifth Ring, but most of them will have hidden their resources carefully. Even if I infiltrate a sect, I'll have to take on someone's identity in order to search the place. Then, I'll have to rely on luck to find anything valuable. That's not efficient at all. It's a waste of time and troublesome as well. The best way is to get the sects to get their resources organized of their own accord. It'll make things easier for me when I come for the resources. That's why, if I want to conduct a robbery, the ideal target is a battleship that has just returned from a successful raid and is filled with loot. Not only am I guaranteed a bountiful harvest, but I can also take the battleship apart and harvest it for parts. Wang Baoli's eyes shone intensely. The feeling of being in a foreign civilization, unbound by obligation, excited him. He concealed his presence and headed for the stars. The main star of the Divine Eye star system housed numerous sects. That meant that there were plenty of battleships around. Some of those battleships were capable of long-distance travel, while others were only capable of travel within the star system. Numerous battleships arrived and departed the star system. The number might not be astoundingly high, but it was still considerable. That was the sight that greeted Wang Baoli when he appeared outside the outer atmosphere of the Divine Eye civilization. His eyes swept across the numerous battleships, he rubbed his chin, and his appearance began to shift rapidly as he transformed from Long Nanzi to Dua Xian. He coughed, then raised his right hand in a wave. In his storage bag, the donkey, which had been sleeping soundly just a moment earlier, stirred awake. My dear son, it's time for you to prove yourself. Come, tell your daddy. Based on your vast experience of munching on everything in sight, which battleship do you think has the most resources hidden inside? Chapter 739, Freeze. Chapter 739, Freeze. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. The main Divine Eye planet's atmosphere resembled that of Earth in some ways and differed in others. The environment or the nature of the abyss surrounding the star system might have contributed to that. The main star's atmosphere was thicker than Earth's. Unless one was at the Soul Conduit realm, the extent that one's senses could reach out was limited. That was why the battleships entering and departing the planet shared a vulnerability. They couldn't sense what was going on outside the battleship. The Divine Eye civilization might be one that centered on banditry, with a fine tradition of killing and stealing from their own, but such acts were always done secretly, and most happened between individual cultivators. Malicious acts that involved the robbery of entire battleships did occur, but they were often followed by swift retaliation in the form of vicious acts of vengeance and warrants. As a result, they occurred more infrequently. Wang Baoli was currently hidden within the planet's atmosphere. It was difficult for him to assess which of those numerous battleships before him was the target with the highest value. Each sect's battleship was different from the rest. A veil of concealment hid the actual contents. Unless one took a battleship apart or scanned the battleship with their senses, it was difficult to discern what the battleship housed or what it was built from. That made Wang Baoli's task more challenging. He might be a powerful fighter, but his senses weren't precise enough for him to scan the entire region with a single sweep. Besides, he had to ensure that his presence remained hidden while he conducted such a sweep. It appeared that his attempt at robbery was going to rely heavily on luck. He had a feeling that the donkey was going to be of help here. The creature had eaten all manners of things and had survived until today. It had gotten its fill of different kinds of resources as well. That should have honed its instinct and increased its chances of identifying a battleship filled with a bountiful harvest. In principle, the chances of battleships returning to the planet being filled to the brim with loot were high. Luck might play a huge part in Wang Baoli's current endeavor, but one couldn't discount the technique that was involved in selecting a target. Both luck and technique are on our side. Son, it's all up to you now. Quick, find a battleship. Wang Baoli coughed and patted the donkey. It had just tumbled out of the storage space and was still in a daze. There was a lost look on the donkey's face. It looked at Wang Baoli, then gazed into the distance at the battleships entering and departing the planet's atmosphere. Finally, it turned and looked at Wang Baoli again. There was a pitiful look on its face, and it opened its mouth, ready to bray. I'll split a portion with you if you manage to find one. If you don't, then you can go back into the storage bag and starve. Wang Baoli glared. The donkey sucked in a frightened gasp upon hearing those words, its huge eyes glistening with tears. After a long moment, it turned its head away, a fierce look flashing in its eyes. As it stared unblinkingly at the battleships before it, its nose twitched. It was as if the battleships before it were plates of food. What it had to do now was find the most delicious one. It can smell them even when they're so far away. Wang Baoli said curiously. Just as his curiosity was piqued, the donkey began to bray in agitation. Son, son! It cried out as it lifted its hooves and pointed towards a battleship that had just returned from space. It appeared worried that its actions weren't clear enough. The donkey sneezed and exhaled a cloud of smoke, which shifted and transformed into the shape of the battleship it had pointed at. Wang Baoli lifted his head hastily. Doubt flashed across his eyes instantly. The battleship that the donkey had identified looked extremely ordinary. There didn't appear to be anything exceptional about it. Its size couldn't even compare to that of the Holy Crest sect's battleship, with it being half the size of the latter. It didn't appear to be an extremely fast battleship either. It trudged alongside 7 to 8 other battleships, looking completely ordinary. Parts of it even appeared damaged, and it didn't seem to be the result of battle but of overuse. It was merely the natural outcome of wear and tear. Perhaps a lack of funding had led to the lack of repairs. As Wang Baoli studied the battleship from afar, somewhere inside the battleship were dozens of cultivators. Only 5 or 6 of them were at the nascent soul realm, while the weakest of them was at the late-stage core formation realm. They appeared relaxed, their eyes shining with unbridled excitement. A few kept pulling out black, fist-sized rocks from their storage bags. They touched the rocks tenderly, as if they were holding precious gems in their hands. We're going to be rich this time. Who knew that the vast Weeping Vein star system was hiding a small civilization with such great stores of star illusory stones? Star illusory stones. These stones are essential for crafting a 5th belt battleship. A single stone the size of a man's fist can be traded for a level 8 soldier. Such a precious resource, and to think that the civilization's strongest cultivator is only at the core formation realm. They don't deserve these resources, yet they still dared to fight back. They deserve to be wiped out. It's a pity that their biophysical structure is so different from ours. Otherwise, we could have captured them and used them as vessels for refinement. The mention of the civilization's strongest cultivator sent the group laughing out loud. They relaxed further as they approached their home planet and their sect. Everyone, be on your guard. We have quite a bountiful haul this time around. We won't be able to shoulder the consequences if anything happens to it. Yoon Lindsay, control the extent of the spirit chi source being released. Let's keep our heads down. It's not the right time to unleash the full speed of the battleship. We'll do that when we enter the atmosphere. The cultivator's leader, an elder at the perfected nascent soul realm, frowned and barked amidst all the laughter. Elder, we've returned to the home planet. What accident can befall us now? You should rest. The resources we got this time around should be sufficient for you to advance to the next cultivation realm. Let's extend an early congratulation to our elder. That's right, elder. Stop worrying. Our concealment is flawless. Our battleship looks ordinary and shows signs of wear and tear. It's completely unexceptional. No one will think of targeting us. Besides, it's been years since someone has done something as terrible as robbing a battleship. The sect should be sending someone to receive us soon. Don't worry, relax. The elder gave those words some thought and relaxed slightly. The thought of having sufficient resources for his next breakthrough in cultivation made his insides burn with anticipation. Of course, these cultivators, who had just returned fresh from a massacre with their battleship filled to the brim with treasures, had no idea that two intense stares had locked onto their battleship. Two entities, one larger, one smaller, hid in the clouds, their sights locked firmly onto the battleship. Wang Baoli narrowed his eyes as he stood amidst the clouds. He studied the seemingly ordinary battleship, then quietly asked the donkey. "Son, you sure it's tasty?" "Son." The donkey looked certain. Its hooves trembled with seemingly uncontrollable hunger. It looked as if it was about to dash out at any moment. "Fine, I'll trust you this once. Let's go get it." Wang Baoli's eyes flashed. He discarded any consideration for other battleships and hid himself. They shadowed the battleship quietly. It didn't take long for the seemingly worn-down battleship that reeked of poverty to slowly stray from the other battleships around it. It drifted away and entered the planet's atmosphere. Upon entry, the battleship became hidden amidst thick clouds. It sank further into the atmosphere. A flash of light flickered in Wang Baoli's eyes. They never left the battleship. He unleashed his full speed and allowed his perfected nascent soul realm cultivation to fill his body. He allowed his stellar nascent soul to boost his speed beyond what his current level of cultivation was capable of, giving him the speed of a soul conduit realm cultivator. He was like a shooting star as he raced after the battleship. The battleship unleashed its full speed at the same moment as well. With a speed that was at least triple its original speed, it sped away. Did it sense my presence? Wang Baoli froze. There wasn't time to think though. He stopped trying to hide his presence, unleashing another sudden burst of speed and extending his senses outward. He was like an invisible hurricane that instantly surrounded the battleship. His senses bypassed the battleship's defenses. Instantly, he saw the dozens of cultivators on board. A piercing alarm erupted in the battleship with Wang Baoli's scan. A moment ago, the cultivators on board had been laughing and resting. In the next moment, alarm flashed across their faces. The few nascent soul realm cultivators appeared shocked, and they gasped. A soul conduit realm cultivator? Hurry up, something's not right. They had just heard the battleship's alarm bells and had also sensed the foreign scan. The only cultivators who could extend their senses and see into the inside of a battleship while in the planet's outer atmosphere were those at the soul conduit realm. To do it so brazenly was a clear indication of this cultivator's intent. At least, it was clear to the cultivators on the battleship. There's no soul conduit realm cultivator on board? Does that mean they didn't speed up because they noticed my presence? Wang Baoli's heart rate picked up when he saw the expressions shift on the cultivators' faces. He realized something then. He might have just struck the jackpot this time. A fat juicy lamb had landed on his lap, ready for slaughter. An excited Wang Baoli intentionally changed his voice as he began to laugh maniacally. With a sudden shift, he turned invisible, like a spirit, and threw himself at the battleship that was trying to make its escape. He passed through the battleship's hull as his voice thundered in the cultivators' heads like a sudden, oral explosion. Freeze, this is a robbery. Chapter 740, A Bountiful Harvest. Chapter 740, A Bountiful Harvest. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. The voice that Wang Baoli took on sounded slightly raspy and was filled with untamed violence. He was trying to mimic the voice of the giant tree. His voice filled the battleship, and the sound of thunder exploded in the heads of every cultivator on board. They appeared deafened, alarm flashing across their faces. The core formation realm cultivators were unable to withstand his voice. Blood flowed from every orifice on their faces, their minds were overwhelmed, and their cultivation was suppressed. The slightly more powerful nascent soul realm cultivators didn't escape unscathed. Their minds buzzed as they spat out huge mouthfuls of blood. They swayed and would have fallen if they hadn't grabbed for the wall next to him. Only the elder, who had the highest level of cultivation amongst them all, managed to withstand Wang Baoli's voice. Even so, blood still seeped from his lips. His face turned pale, and terror flickered in his eyes. Everything happened before Wang Baoli even showed himself. He was still in his immaterial, illusory form and had pounced upon everyone like the devil, leading to their near mental breakdown with only his voice. The series of events had happened in an instant. In the next moment, before anyone could react, black chi began to seep in from the walls and floors of the battleship. The entire battleship was filled with black smoke, which was permeated with a terrifying power. It had a corrosive quality that ate into everything it managed to touch. Within the blink of an eye, the black chi entered the battleship and headed for the cultivators on board. The cultivators appeared powerless against the smoke. It entered their bodies, curled around their storage bags and their dharmic treasures, and left immediately. Some dharmic treasures were pendants hung around necks, while others were unique treasures kept within the cultivators' bodies, which were continuously nourished. None escaped. They were all snatched away by the black chi. The black chi carried the piles of storage bags and dharmic treasures and gathered in the air before everyone, transforming into an indistinct silhouette. The silhouette had an indistinct face, with indistinct facial features, and was surrounded by tufts of smoke that kept expanding and then shrinking. It was a terrifying sight to behold. 2 spheres of crimson light lit up the entity's face. They turned towards the cultivators who had just been robbed of their belongings. Those illusory eyes almost seemed to take on a physical form when they turned themselves onto the cultivators. Everyone's minds began to buzz loudly, in alarm, under the stare. Cold winds began to stir, and a terrible frosty cold invaded the battleship. It chilled one's physical form while inflaming one's soul. The cultivators felt as if their souls were on fire. The 2 vastly different sensations assailed every cultivator on board. They were strange and terrifying sensations. The cultivators at the core formation realm couldn't take it anymore and passed out instantly. A few of the nascent soul realm cultivators were struggling as well. They had to unleash and activate their cultivation to the fullest in order to resist the pain being inflicted on their spirits and their bodies. The elder spat out another huge mouthful of blood as he grabbed onto the chair next to him. Then, with a voice laced with terror, he struggled to speak. "We are disciples of the Thousand Spirit sect. Our Grand Supreme Elder is Gong Sun Hu." "Esteemed Elder." "Silence." The entity formed from black smoke snorted before the elder could finish speaking. The sound was like a bolt of lightning assaulting everyone's minds. The nascent soul realm elder could no longer take it and spat out another few mouthfuls of blood. The mysterious entity raised its right hand and swept it across the air. A strong force suddenly appeared, and a vortex materialized inside the battleship. It led to the outside. The vortex began to draw everything towards it with an overpowering force, yanking at everyone on board with the intention to swallow them whole. The cultivators reappeared outside the battleship, in the planet's atmosphere. Fierce winds whipped at them, and thunder roared next to their ears. They trembled feebly, terrified but relieved at their still being alive. They watched as their battleship unleashed a sudden burst of speed and raced off into the distance. The entire robbery had taken place in a flash. The victims of the crime were currently shivering in the icy winds, most of them looking lost. They couldn't seem to believe what had just happened to them. They were supposed to be galactic pirates. They had just returned from a bountiful hunt. But just as they had entered their home planet, they had been pirated by someone else in turn. The elder who had been in charge of leading the team stood immobile for a dozen seconds before letting loose a pained howl. His eyes had turned red. He ignored his fellow sect members, unleashed his full speed, and raced downwards, heading for land. As he charged out, he lifted his right hand and smacked his chest violently where no one could see him do it. His actions exacerbated his injuries. He looked a mess with blood continuing to spill from his lips as he raced across the planet's atmosphere. He was heading for the location where they were supposed to meet the sect. He emerged from the atmosphere and arrived at the designated location. A dozen cultivators from his sect who had arrived to receive his team came into view. He immediately let out a pained scream. "Sect Lord, I have failed in my duty. I tried my best and fought with everything I had. Despite sustaining heavy injuries, I failed to ensure the safety of our battleship. Our battleship has been stolen." The elder forced those words from his lips, then spat out a mouthful of blood in mid-air. He appeared to have succumbed to the severity of his injuries and to have lost the ability to fly, falling from the sky. His fellow sect cultivators, who had traveled a long way to receive his team, were all alarmed by the sight. They caught his falling body, and as they began to heal his injuries, they started to ask in detail what had happened. Amongst them was a middle-aged cultivator. Shock flashed across his face as he listened to the elders recounting of what had happened. He immediately pulled out a jade slip and sent out a voice transmission. The next moment was marked by changing skies. Winds howled, and clouds rolled back. A figure emerged in the distance. His appearance was marked by roaring hurricanes all around him. Awe filled the cultivators who witnessed the figure's arrival. In the next moment, the new arrival appeared before Elder Sunday. He was a tall man, much taller than a regular man, with an overpowering early-stage soul conduit realm cultivation. He was the Grand Supreme Elder of the Thousand Spirit Sect, Gongsun Hu. What happened? The towering man asked solemnly. His eyes were intense and held a look of authority. Elder Sun trembled in the face of his own Grand Supreme Elder and frantically recounted the robbery. A flash of murder appeared in Gongsun Hu's eyes after he was done. The Grand Supreme Elder's hair shifted in the still air. It was clear that he was deeply enraged. Who dares to rob the battleship of the Thousand Spirit Sect? Is he tired of living? Gongsun Hu raised his right hand and clenched his fist. A bolt of lightning descended from the heavens and gathered inside his fist, transforming into a sphere of electricity that hissed dangerously. He flung his fist outward, and the sphere of electricity flew into the atmosphere and exploded. In its wake was a passageway. The furious Gongsun Hu stepped into the passageway, and his divine sense stretched out. With a series of hand seals, he located the position of their sect's battleship and immediately began pursuit. As the Grand Supreme Elder of the Thousand Spirit Sect began a furious pursuit, Wang Baoli stood inside the battleship of the Thousand Spirit Sect, which was located quite some distance away from the Grand Supreme Elder. Wang Baoli had materialized and taken on the appearance of Zhui Xian. He stared at the storage bags before him that he had opened earlier, his eyes wide and shining with excitement. Star illusory stones. I'm rich. Wang Baoli said excitedly. He ignored the donkey next to him, which was licking its lips in anticipation. With a wave of his hand, he stored the storage bags. His eyes landed on the battleship next. He had managed to take control of the battleship quite easily. There must be some kind of tracker hidden on this battleship, but I can't just give it up. That'd be too much of a waste. Wang Baoli narrowed his eyes before beginning to work. His proficiency in dharmic armaments and the practical experience he had gained over the past months came in useful, as he began to dismantle the battleship. He hadn't had the time to craft more puppets during the past few months. So, to help with the dismantling process, he made use of his essence technique and conjured a few less powerful avatars so that he had a few additional pairs of hands. The first component to be dismantled was the dharmic artifact in the battleship's core sector. Next came the stellar source that was fueling the battleship. Then came the battleship's defensive and offensive capabilities. With the help of his avatars, Wang Baoli was able to break the battleship apart in quick order. His goal was to dismantle as many components as he could. His priorities were components that were easily taken apart and those that were of the most value. Soul guiding ring? I'll take that. An engine set? That's good stuff. It's mine now. Parts made from shackled mist stone? That's rare. I'll have that as well. Wang Baoli grew increasingly excited as he continued taking the battleship apart. The donkey was affected as well. Damage to parts during the disassembly process was unavoidable. These damaged components became the best sort of snack for the donkey. It happily munched on bits of components at the side. An hour passed. During this hour, Gongsun Hu continued to race madly across the planet. Meanwhile, the battleship was reduced to 2/3 of its original form after Wang Baoli's dismantling and the donkey's snacking. Wang Baoli finally managed to rein in his greed at the last moment. He filled the storage bags that he had stolen, then, with much regret, stopped taking the battleship apart. He held onto the donkey and turned invisible again. They passed through the battleship and left immediately. Having lost a third of its components, as well as its source of fuel, the battleship began to slow down. It left the planet's atmosphere and began to plunge downwards, towards land, like a meteor about to crash. Chapter 741, Stealing Fish in Murky Waters. Chapter 741, Stealing Fish in Murky Waters. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. The battleship had lost its source of energy and emerged from the planet's atmosphere. It was heading straight for land and was about to crash into the mountains. The Grand Supreme Elder of the Thousand Spirit Sect, Gongsun Hu, had been in fierce pursuit of the battleship. He raced in the outer atmosphere as he relied on his lightning-based mystic technique to locate the battleship. Then, his pupils suddenly contracted. The unique properties of the planet's atmosphere meant that he couldn't lock down the exact location of the battleship. He only knew roughly where it was. However, he could immediately sense exactly where the battleship was as soon as it descended from the atmosphere. Without any hesitation, Gongsun Hu raced out from the atmosphere and vanished as he teleported away. The Thousand Spirit Sect's battleship appeared right before his eyes when he reappeared again. It was crashing towards the ground. Shrieks pierced the air, which sounded like the howling of wind all around him. Oh no! Gongsun Hu's face paled. There was no time to think. He unleashed his full cultivation as he raced towards the battleship in an attempt to stop it from crashing. The Thousand Spirit Sect might be many times wealthier than the Holy Crest Sect, but it only had 3 battleships capable of galactic travel. The destruction of any one of those battleships would be a tremendous loss to the sect. That was why Gongsun Hu had unleashed his full speed. He appeared instantly before the battleship that was crashing towards the ground. Then, he raised both his arms and pressed his palms on the battleship. He was going to try and stop the battleship from crashing with his cultivation alone. A loud thunder resonated in the air. Gongsun Hu's face turned pale, the veins in his arms bulged, and one could see the veins on his face clearly. He continued to unleash his cultivation as he was pushed back continuously by the weight of the battleship. Finally, his feet landed on solid ground. It groaned and splintered, and cracks spread from where he had landed, stretching as far as 10,000 feet. Before long, the ground caved in, relieving the pressure on Gongsun Hu. He roared as the pressure weighing down on him was eased. He finally managed to gain control of the battleship with his overwhelming cultivation. Gongsun Hu slowly placed the battleship next to him. Then, panting, he extended his divine sense and surveyed the damage. He had been prepared for what he was likely going to see, but it still enraged him to the point that he trembled with fury. The interior of the battleship was a mess. It was clearly missing many components, with several parts of the battleship being emptied completely. The missing parts were the most valuable parts of the battleship, and there were even bite marks on what remained. The sight pained Gongsun Hu greatly. Under his lead, his sect had exterminated countless civilizations and massacred countless species. He had scrimped and saved the resources that he had plundered and pillaged over the years. Finally, that had allowed the sect to build 3 battleships. But now, one of his precious battleships had been taken apart to such a horrifying degree. He found it hard to breathe at the moment, especially when he thought about how he had also been robbed of the precious star illusory stones. The pain he was feeling now was akin to being ripped apart. His cultivation churned violently inside him. There was a vicious look on Gongsun Hu's face as he raised his head skyward and let loose a furious howl. I don't care who you are. The Thousand Spirit Sect will find you. We will crush your bones into ash and destroy both your body and spirit. His voice surged outwards, echoing in the atmosphere. It reached Wang Baoli, who hadn't yet left the area. Only you're allowed to rob other civilizations? No one else is allowed to rob you? Wang Baoli glared and stopped in his tracks. He contemplated going back and teaching the other cultivator a good lesson. Then he thought about the repercussions if he were to do that. The backlash that would result from that might make it inconvenient for him to engineer a second robbery. He snorted and decided to ignore the cultivator's threat. He turned and headed back to the Holy Crest Sect. Wang Baoli sneaked quietly into the restricted zone upon his return. He returned to his chambers, sat down, and began to go through his loot. His eyes shone increasingly brighter as he went through his loot. A horse can only grow fat if it secretly munches grass at night. There's some truth to that saying. What I've earned today is almost as much as what the Holy Crest sect got through Orthodox means in its previous auction. Wang Baoli began the construction of his very own battleship with great excitement. He had amassed sufficient resources for the time being. In the days that followed, Wang Baoli immersed himself in the crafting of components for his battleship. He didn't pay much attention to what was going on in the world outside. He wasn't unconcerned about the reactions to his robbery, but he believed that he had handled the matter prudently. Even though he might not be extremely well versed in the art of piracy, he knew that a sect would view a pure robbery and a robbery and murder very differently. The former entailed only a loss of wealth. The loss might be painful, but the damage was really to the sect's reputation. However, the latter would amount to a declaration of war. Outsiders would view it this way as well. The degree of malice was clearly different. If one heard that their neighbor was robbed of something precious, they would instinctively raise their guard and be more cautious. However, if one heard that their neighbor had been killed, their reaction wouldn't be restricted to a mere increased sense of caution. The reactions following Wang Baoli's robbery were as he had predicted. It was almost impossible to hide the fact that the Thousand Spirit sect's battleship had been stolen. Besides, the sect had quite a few enemies. The robbery of their battleship soon made headlines across the planet. The news spread like wildfire. Every sect, big and small, was talking about it. Even the disciples in the Holy Crest sect were discussing the matter. There was a slight edge of caution to their words, as well as a great deal of petty cheer over someone else's misery. Have you heard? The Thousand Spirit sect's battleship returned with a full bounty and was robbed. Not only was their loot stolen, but a great portion of their battleship was also taken apart. Something like that hasn't happened in years. The Thousand Spirit sect has always been cocky. Who knew this would happen to them? Ha ha, I asked around. I heard they destroyed a small civilization and got their hands on a mountain of star illusory stones. They worked so hard only for those stones to fall into someone else's hands. Wang Baoli might be immersed in the construction of his battleship, but he would still get out occasionally and take charge of the repairs on the Holy Crest sect's battleship. He would catch snippets of discussions amongst other disciples. He would frown then. The Thousand Spirit sect belongs to the cluster of sects on the fifth mountain ring. We might not be able to offer aid after they were robbed, but we should be careful to only discuss the robbery within the confines of the sect grounds. We shouldn't speak so carelessly when we are outside. At the same time, we should practice greater caution so that the same thing doesn't happen to us. Wang Baoli had a stern expression on his face as he spoke seriously. The disciples who had been discussing the matter trembled secretly. They lowered their heads and murmured their agreement. The Grand Supreme Elder agreed with what Wang Baoli had said as well. In fact, he gathered the 7 elders to discuss this matter with them in detail. Grand Supreme Elder, I have a humble suggestion. We could ask the Thousand Spirit sect if they require our help in searching for the perpetrator. It doesn't matter if we're sincere in helping or merely putting up appearances. It might also help prevent something similar from happening to the Holy Crest sect in the future. Wang Baoli coughed and said seriously during the meeting, as if he were truly concerned about the Holy Crest sect. The Grand Supreme Elder smiled and waved Wang Baoli's suggestion aside. I sought out fellow Daoist Gongsun immediately when I heard about this, but Gongsun, who seems suspicious of everyone at the moment, he rejected my offer to help. We cannot blame him. It's really quite embarrassing. A galactic pirate is supposed to be the one doing the pillaging and plundering, but he's now being robbed by someone else. Another elder smiled and said, there's a high likelihood that someone in the sect leaked information about the returning battleship. So many battleships return to the home planet every day. There's no way to explain why theirs was targeted. Wang Baoli nodded and provided a seemingly intelligent analysis of the situation. It was in line with what the other sects were guessing as well. It had been a while since someone had attempted to rob a battleship on the Divine Eye planet. Not to mention that the target had seemed too deliberate. It was as if the perpetrator had known that the battleship had been the one carrying the most valuable load. The farce of a galactic pirate being pirated soon became a running joke amongst the few sects hostile to the Thousand Spirit sect. The Water Refinement sect, especially, put a lot of effort into fanning the flames. The Thousand Spirit sect felt the most miserable of all sects in the days that followed. They had lost their hard-earned loot, their battleship had been dismantled for parts, and they had to put up with the mocking commentary coming from other sects such as the Water Refinement sect. In addition, no matter how relentlessly they investigated, they couldn't find any traces of evidence explaining the robbery or identifying the perpetrator. In a moment of rage, Gongsun, who had carried out a ruthless investigation against the members of his own sect, to no avail. Gongsun, who was frustrated. He suspected the Water Refinement sect was involved in the entire fiasco but had no evidence to prove his suspicions. In the end, he prepared to continue the investigation in secret. It seemed that there was no end in sight. A month passed. Wang Baoli was sitting inside his chamber when he raised his head, his eyes shining. He licked his lips. I've used up all the materials. Chapter 742, Go Big or Go Home. Chapter 742, Go Big or Go Home. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Here I come. Wang Baoli coughed. He stood up and disappeared from the secret chamber, reappearing in the sky outside a moment later. With a single step, he entered the atmosphere. He had taken on Zhuo Yixian's appearance once again. This disguise had little use in the previous robbery, but Wang Baoli was well versed in the high officials' autobiographies. He remembered there was a line in one of those autobiographies that mentioned cultivating certain good habits that could help compensate for personality and other habitual flaws. There are still many dangers that can threaten my life in the Divine Eye star system. Transforming into smoke is my first layer of protection. Should my presence be detected, I'll appear as Zhuo Yixian. That will be my second layer of protection. Wang Baoli patted his face. He thought that it didn't hurt to be a little more careful. He kept his disguise as Zhuo Yixian, then transformed his disguised form into black smoke. The black smoke traveled swiftly in the atmosphere and soon reached its uppermost region. Wang Baoli found a discreet spot and hid himself. He stared into space and watched the battleships entering and leaving the planet. He released the donkey then as well. To stop the donkey from braying, he threw a piece of scrap material that was left over from the Thousand Spirit sect battleship. Wang Baoli grinned. Son, the old rules apply. The donkey gobbled up the scrap material in a few bites. Its eyes shone intensely as it licked its lips. It appeared to be enjoying the snack and recalling the taste of the scrap materials it had eaten recently. It lifted its head, spirits high. Driven by a strong innate hunger for more food, the donkey studied the battleships that passed it. Its gaze was like the divine sense of a powerful cultivator. It's a pity that the members of the Thousand Spirit sect are such cowards. They actually declared that they will be temporarily ceasing all galactic travel. In times like this, shouldn't they set a trap instead? Load a battleship with hordes of precious resources and use that to lure the culprit out. Wang Baoli sighed. As an elder of the Holy Crest sect, he had been able to get information on the Thousand Spirit sect's moves. The information he had gotten wasn't complete, but it was enough. He knew that Gongsun, who had put a hold on galactic trips out of the star system. There would be no trips out of the star system for the Thousand Spirit sect within the year. What is the Thousand Spirit sect thinking? Wang Baoli shook his head. He was about to think more deeply about the intentions driving the Thousand Spirit sect's actions when the donkey suddenly shivered. It started braying at Wang Baoli. Wang Baoli perked up. He raised his head and looked in the direction the donkey was pointing him towards. Wang Baoli's eyes glowed, and he licked his lips. After a long moment, he stored the donkey and then transformed into black smoke, disappearing. It didn't take long before a Water Refinement sect battleship that had just returned to the planet charged into the atmosphere, the roars rumbling from its entry resonating in the air. The Thousand Spirit sect battleship incident had the other sects on high alert. They had implemented certain measures to prevent the same from happening to them. However, the Thousand Spirit sect hadn't revealed the full details of the robbery. In addition, the other sects had attributed the cause to a leak of confidential information in the sect. They all thought it had been an inside job. Besides, there had been no repeated incidents in the 2 months that followed the first robbery, so everyone's guard had naturally lowered. It didn't take long before the cultivators inside the Water Refinement sect battleship heard the same terrifying voice that the cultivators aboard the Thousand Spirit sect battleship had heard. Freeze, this is a robbery. Half an hour later, when the Grand Supreme Elder of the Water Refinement Sect hastily led his men to a remote valley, they were greeted with the sight of a severely damaged battleship that had crashed into the valley. Outrage and fury consumed the cultivators instantly. Upon inspection, they realized that the battleship was missing nearly half of its components. Even though the disciples on board the battleship were all unharmed, the loot that they had gotten from this trip had all been stolen. The female Grand Supreme Elder of the Water Refinement Sect was so furious that she almost spat blood. "Look into this. I don't care if we have to put up a reward for it, I want this scoundrel found. I'm going to rip this wretched beast into pieces." The Water Refinement Sect was in an uproar. They were amongst the most powerful sects on the Fifth Mountain Ring, reputable and as powerful as the Thousand Spirit Sect. Their sect disciples numbered in the tens of thousands. News of the sect's mad search for the culprit who robbed them soon spread like wildfire. 2 robberies had occurred within a short span of a few months. News of the second robbery erupted instantly. Every sect was shocked when they found out. The Thousand Spirit Sect robbery could have been considered an isolated incident. But now the Water Refinement Sect had been targeted as well. This wasn't something that could be easily explained away as an inside job. A serial robber appeared to be on the loose. Any criminal tagged with the word serial was going to create an uproar. Many sects on the main Divine Eye planet went on high alert instantly. They felt threatened, and they poured everything they had into protecting their own battleships. While numerous sects were panicking, the disciples of the Thousand Spirit Sect were laughing at them. Gongsun who laughed the loudest. He hadn't revealed details of the robbery that had targeted their battleship in order to preserve whatever reputation remained of their sect. He had run through the entire robbery in detail and even tried replicating it. He had been left with the realization that he was dealing with an extremely difficult opponent, and he hadn't been willing to share that information. Besides, he had been looking forward to seeing other sects suffer as well. Weren't they all talking about how the Thousand Spirit Sect was supposed to be a galactic pirate, but ended up being pirated by someone else? The Water Refinement Sect seemed especially cheerful, mocking us. Who's the idiot now? The Thousand Spirit Sect continued to mock the other sect's misery with great glee. The Water Refinement Sect's investigation went on for 2 weeks, but no clues surfaced, even when they put up significant rewards. It was then that the third robbery happened and shocked the sects. This time, the target wasn't a sect from the 5th Mountain Ring, it was multiple sects from the 6th, 7th, and 8th Mountain Rings. Within a single night, within the span of 2 hours, 17 battleships that belonged to sects on the 6th to 8th Mountain Rings were robbed. The robbers' target wasn't the resources the battleships carried, but the components of the battleships themselves. An uproar overtook the entire main Divine Eye planet. The Grand Supreme Elder of the Water Refinement Sect was shocked by the scale of the robberies that had been committed. After some deliberation, she approached her longtime rival, Gongsun Hu. No one knew what they discussed, but the day after their private discussion, the 2 sects made a joint declaration calling for all sects from the 5th to the 8th Mountain Rings to join them in a joint investigation. They swore to find the wretched culprit behind the series of shameless and brutal robberies. The large-scale investigation took the 5th to 8th Mountain Rings by storm. There was no end in sight. Despite the ruckus that had resulted from everything, the 3 main sects, which were stationed on the 2nd to 4th Mountain Rings, didn't seem to care. The difference in power between the 3 main sects and the remaining sects was too great. To the former, it was like watching a group of children crying over broken toys. The massive search didn't yield the results that the sects desired. During this period, battleships belonging to sects on the 6th to 8th Mountain Rings continued to be raided. The robbers' activities had worsened. There was now a casualty count and people dead. Battleships were no longer simply missing parts, entire battleships were stolen. That led to a greater uproar. Voices demanding for the culprit to be found and for his death began to resound in every sect. Upon hearing what had been going on, Wang Baoli himself was enraged as well. Damned scoundrel! Who's trying to use me as a scapegoat for their malicious deeds? Wang Baoli was displeased. The last robbery he had committed was the string of 17 battleships. Everything that happened after that hadn't been him at all. It was obvious that no one man could have stolen entire battleships. Only a sect was capable of doing that. Others might have guessed the same, But Wang Baoli was certain that some sect was exploiting the current situation and trying to fish for profit, while the situation remained murky. He didn't care to find out which sect, or sects, was responsible. As an icy glint flashed across his eyes, a plan formed in his head. So, someone's gutsy enough to try and make me a scapegoat. Are they gutsy enough to bear the consequences? Wang Baoli narrowed his eyes, hiding the frosty look within. He charged out of his chamber then and, with the aid of his essence technique, raced towards the heavens without detection. The next robbery he was going to commit was going to be a big one. He only lacked that final batch of resources. He'd stop after this robbery. Besides, he wanted shit to hit the fan. He wanted the upper sects to take notice and get involved. Wang Baoli had the skills to accomplish what he set out to do, and he had the guts to do it as well. He had his essence technique, which would keep him hidden, so he wasn't afraid of any investigations. The sects that were trying to use him as a scapegoat, however, were different. Once it was discovered that they had been involved in the robberies, the rage of the upper sects and every sect that had been robbed would fall upon them like a heavy fist. They could swear that they had only done it that one time, but no one would choose to believe them. After all, finding out who had committed the robberies might appear to matter, but in reality, it didn't actually matter all that much. There was only one thing that mattered in this world that put profits above everything else, and based the development and growth of the civilization on invading and robbing other civilizations, and that was finding someone who could compensate their losses many times more than their actual losses. That would be enough. When the time came, even if someone did see through his ploy, they would choose to remain silent as well. We'll see who becomes the final scapegoat. Wang Baoli sneered before he transformed into a cloud of smoke and sped away. Chapter 743, They're not my clansmen, so who cares? Chapter 743, They're not my clansmen, so who cares? Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. 3 major sects reigned supreme in the Divine Eye civilization. They had the power to influence and to a certain extent, control the Divine Eye royalty. These 3 sects were the Divine Sovereign Justice sect, the Earth Hexagram Unity sect, and the Violet Gold New Tao sect. These 3 upper sects were extremely powerful and influential. Together, they were seen as the rulers of the Divine Eye civilization. They had their headquarters built on their own separate planets and had subsidiary sects on the main Divine Eye planet as well. Sects located on the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th mountain rings were all controlled and managed by these 3 upper sects. The cultivators from the 3 upper sects who were stationed on the home planet might not be the most powerful cultivators of the sects, but they had incredibly important roles. The significance of having a branch sect on the home planet couldn't be underestimated. That was also the reason why there was generally always a late-stage Soul Conduit realm cultivator holding the fort in the branch sects on the home planet. The headquarters would send resources to the branch sects on the home planet every month. Based on the agreement set between the 3 upper sects and the royal family, a portion of the resources would be channeled towards the royal family. The remaining portion would be channeled towards the branch sects for their members' cultivation needs. The 3 upper sects possessed a wealth of resources. This led to their disciples' great expenditure of resources, for both their personal cultivation as well as their daily needs, which vastly exceeded that of an ordinary disciple in a lower sect. The resources the upper sects transferred to the home planet every monthly were of significant value. It was enough to drive the other sects on the 5th mountain ring mad with envy. No matter how green-eyed with envy they got, no one dared to do anything that might incur the wrath of the 3 great sects. The 3 great sects didn't even have to install that many defense mechanisms on their battleships. They had been allowing their battleships to run free in the Divine Eye star system for years. The emblems on their battleships were their greatest defense. At this moment, a battleship that spanned 100,000 feet was traveling in space. It had a looming presence filled with authority and power. As the battleship raced towards the main Divine Eye planet, other battleships in its path moved aside. No one dared to stand in the way of this battleship. The battleship was purple, and its shape resembled a Kuan Peng. Fixed at its helm was a huge crystal that sparkled and exuded waves of purple light and a powerful aura. The huge gem and the battleship's color ensured that any cultivator from the Divine Eye civilization would recognize the sect the battleship belonged to at first glance. This was a Violet Gold New Tao sect battleship. The battleship's Kuan-Peng-shaped hull meant that it was a battleship that belonged to the Kuan-Peng Legion, one of the legions under the sect's 9 Sacred Beasts Legion. The Kuan-Peng Legion wasn't the strongest legion in the Violet Gold New Dao sect. Regardless, its military capabilities were still strong enough to inspire general fear and awe. The commander of the legion was at the perfected Soul Conduit realm, and had dozens of powerful Soul Conduit realm cultivators under his command. The legion was famous within the Divine Eye civilization. Its fierce invasions made it infamous in foreign civilizations as well. That was why, even though the battleship was traveling alone and in the capacity of a transport vehicle, without any other ships escorting it, it still managed to inspire awe in the cultivators aboard surrounding battleships. The surrounding battleships moved to stay out of the path of the Kuan-Peng Legion battleship. Like royalty that had descended upon the common populace, the Kuan-Peng Legion battleship approached the main Divine Eye planet, its path unhindered. It didn't slow down as it charged towards its home planet. It entered the planet's atmosphere instantly and headed for the third mountain ring. Perhaps they had it too easy for too long and had become overconfident and careless as a result. Neither the battleship, nor the cultivators on board who were in charge of transporting the month's resources had sensed the wisp of black smoke that had approached the battleship as soon as the latter had entered the planet's atmosphere. The black smoke had raced towards the battleship and appeared next to it instantly. Before the battleship could sound any alarms, the black smoke, which was really Wang Baoli in his hidden form, lunged at the battleship like a salacious pervert who had just seen a beautiful lady. A dozen seconds later, the battleship shifted. It was no longer headed for the third mountain ring but for the 8th mountain ring. The planet's atmosphere was a natural barrier that interfered with the battleship's communication system. That was why the cultivators on board couldn't inform the sect when the battleship was steered off course. Half an hour passed, and the battleship carrying the sect's monthly resources still didn't arrive at the sect. That was when the sect realized something was wrong. Even then, the sect hadn't paid too much attention to the delay. The pride of being an upper sect, which had been instilled in every disciple, ensured that none of them even considered the possibility of something bad having happened to the battleship. The only threats that the three main sects faced were each other. The constant tensions amongst the sects were shown in their constant competitions. None of them would resort to robbing the other easily. That was why, it took another half an hour, during which they still didn't see the arrival of their battleship, before the Violet Gold New Dao sect realized that something was wrong. It might have taken them a while to reach that realization, but once they did, their reaction was swift. Within 30 seconds, the entire sect was in an uproar. More than 30 battleships rushed out from the third mountain ring and headed for the atmosphere in search of the missing battleship. 6 Soul Conduit Realm cultivators teleported out instantly, while more than 100 nascent Soul Realm cultivators and even more Core Formation Realm cultivators followed closely behind. It was a sight that shocked the entire planet. Every sect was making their own guesses about what had happened. The Violet Gold New Dao sect carried out a massive search and soon found their missing battleship in a valley on the 8th mountain ring. Every Violet Gold New Dao sect disciple widened their eyes and gasped aloud when they saw the state of the battleship. Incredulity filled their eyes. Their own battleship looked almost foreign. The battleship looked nothing like it should. The cultivators on board were unharmed, having passed out from a spiritual attack. The battleship they were in, on the other hand, no words could describe its state. The gem on the battleship's helm had gone missing, and in its place was a huge, gaping hole. The dharmic artifacts in the battleship's core sector had all been dismantled and stolen. The material lining the battleship's hull hadn't escaped unscathed either, with the most valuable parts having been sliced off. Almost 30% of the battleship's surface was now gone. The sight was simply too much to bear. Shock filled every Soul Conduit Realm cultivator who landed in the valley and saw the sight of their sect's battleship. The current elder in charge of the branch sect on the home planet was a perfected Soul Conduit Realm cultivator. He left his seclusion and came to the valley. The elder had a head full of white hair and a hunched back. He appeared ancient. Death filled his grey eyes. The elder looked like a man who had just crawled out of his own grave. However, as soon as this seemingly weak old man arrived in the valley, all plant life in the area shriveled up instantly. The elder eyed the ruined battleship while everyone kept their heads lowered. He suddenly laughed. Is this a result of your negligence, or is someone trying to test the waters and find out whether I've grown old and weak? As he spoke, the elder raised his shriveled right hand and grabbed the dozen unconscious cultivators inside the battleship. Before they could stir awake, these cultivators began to quake violently. They shriveled up within the blink of an eye, their flesh and blood, as well as their souls, sucked out of their forms and yanked towards the elder. He took a deep breath and inhaled it all in, swallowing everything with a single gulp. He started chewing slowly, and his eyes fell shut. It looked as if he were enjoying the taste of what he had just devoured while activating some form of soul-searching spell. The cultivators around him shook with terror as they watched on. They knew the character of this elder who was currently stationed on the main Divine Eye planet. His violent nature and bloodlust were well known throughout the civilization. It was a long while before the elder finally opened his eyes. Bloodlust flickered within. He said coolly, "It's been years since someone tried to challenge an upper sect. You have my permission to conduct an investigation. You have 3 days to get to the bottom of this. If you don't, then I'll start eating you. 1 person for each extra day taken." Having said that, the elder turned away and vanished. His words remained resonating in the ears of the 6 early-stage Soul Conduit Realm cultivators after his disappearance. Their faces paled drastically, and their breathing quickened. They stared at one another with reddened eyes. Without hesitation, they sent orders to the cultivators in their individual factions to carry out a full-fledged search. No price is too heavy. You have 3 days to find the wretched creature. As the 6 cultivators of the Violet Gold New Tao sect began a furious search, Wang Baoli had returned to the safety of the Holy Crest sect. He sat inside his chambers, his eyes shining. The Violet Gold New Tao sect must be loaded. They were using such a huge piece of instant voidstone as an emblem of their power. And the material that the battleship was crafted from. Purple fire gold. Wang Baoli took a deep breath. The resources he had gathered from his previous robberies couldn't compare to the value of this battleship. He began to recount what had happened during the robbery to ensure that he hadn't left any evidence behind and unwittingly revealed himself. Then, Wang Baoli narrowed his eyes. A cold glint flickered within. This was a civilization that had destroyed an entire planet's human population with a virus, a civilization that lived off invading and pillaging other civilizations. Wang Baoli had no compassion for such a civilization. He didn't care if they lived or perished. They're not my clansmen, so who cares? But it looks like a storm is about to erupt on the Divine Eye planet. Chapter 744, Take Off. Chapter 744, Take Off. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Wang Baoli had expected an uproar to result from the robbery of a battleship that belonged to an upper sect. However, he had underestimated the consequences of his actions. After all, he wasn't truly someone from the Divine Eye civilization. The entire planet was in a constant uproar for the next 3 days. An investigation unfolded across the planet under the leadership of the 6 Soul Conduit Realm cultivators from the Violet Gold New Tao sect. The cultivators took the 5th to 8th mountain rings by storm. Sects that kept their heads down while in the civilization and only unleashed their violent streaks when they were out invading other civilizations. People whose hands were stained with blood, were all caught in the furious storm. It didn't matter if the sect didn't appear suspicious, the Violet Gold New Tao sect barged into every sect and conducted a search without seeking prior permission. The Divine Sovereign Justice sect and the Earth Hexagram Unity sect had reached a concurrence with the Violet Gold New Tao sect on this matter, and coordinated their efforts alongside the latter sects. This was to preserve their authority as an upper sect, and prevent the Violet Gold New Tao sect from falsely accusing sects affiliated with the 2 upper sects of any misdeeds. The royal family also passed a decree on the 2nd day and made a statement of severe admonishment against the perpetrator. The decree ensured that this matter didn't stay within the confines of the main planet. All planets within the Divine Eye civilization became affected by the robbery. Every sect on the main Divine Eye planet was being investigated. Naturally, the Holy Crest sect didn't escape unscathed. A thorough search was conducted by a team led by a Soul Conduit Realm cultivator from the Violet Gold New Tao sect. The Divine Sovereign Justice sect assisted with the search as well. The sect's battleship, which had been repaired partially and was currently parked in the sect's restricted zone, underwent detailed scrutiny too. Every storage bag was checked, and cultivators at the lower cultivation realms were soul-searched. Elders such as Wang Baoli and the Grand Supreme Elder weren't extended such treatment due to the presence of the Divine Sovereign Justice sect. However, they still had to go through an inspection with a soul stone. Inspection with a soul stone wouldn't be as thorough as a soul search, but unless one's cultivation vastly surpassed that of the holder of the soul stone, any lies spoken would immediately be detected. Wang Baoli's cultivation might only be at the perfected nascent soul realm, but his stellar nascent soul was extremely powerful. He also had his essence technique. As a result, he didn't give anything away during the inspection. They didn't find anything during the search through his storage bags either, as he had stored everything suspicious with his true form. The connection he had with his true form ensured that he could send items between them easily. Of course, even if he was made to go through a soul search, Wang Baoli wasn't worried at all. Unless they sent a spirit immortal realm cultivator to do the job, he was confident that he would pass the test. 3 days passed. The robbery and its resultant investigation, which sent the entire civilization into an uproar, yielded no conclusive results. The 6 soul conduit realm cultivators grew increasingly frantic and mad with anxiety. They intended to delve deeper and target the nascent soul realm and soul conduit realm cultivators next with a soul search. It was then that they found something. The water refinement sect appeared to be involved with the robbery. The Thousand Spirit sect was similarly implicated. The clues were like an oasis in a desert. The 6 soul conduit realm cultivators from the Violet Gold New Dao sect latched onto them like lifesavers. They barged into the 2 sects and conducted a relentless search of both places. Secrets were exposed in broad daylight. The 2 sects had joined forces, and engineered the recent spate of robberies that had targeted battleships belonging to sects on the 6th mountain ring. The 6 soul conduit realm cultivators fell silent upon discovering the conspiracy. No one knew what went on during their private discussion, but on the 3rd and last day of the deadline given to them, explosive news was released. The news exposed the water refinement sect and the Thousand Spirit sect as the masterminds behind the series of recent robberies. It spoke of how the sects had gone out of their minds and robbed the Violet Gold New Dao sect's battleship. The news spread like wildfire. No one would have believed the news. They might have believed the first part, but definitely not the second part of it. The water refinement sect and the Thousand Spirit sect would have to be completely mad to rob the Violet Gold New Dao sect. The evidence that was released subsequently all pointed towards the 2 sects having been involved in the recent spate of robberies. The sects on the main Divine Eye planet were silent after hearing that. Then, they immediately expressed their outrage. It didn't matter whether they were truly angry or merely pretending to be angry, everyone made sure to have their voices heard. The royal family passed another decree that day, one that supported the truth of the news that had been released. After a bout of silence, the Violet Gold New Dao sect also made their own announcement declaring the findings from their investigation. The fiasco that had sent the entire civilization into an uproar finally ended. The water refinement sect and the Thousand Spirit sect were hardly in the position to defend themselves. They were treated like goods and turned into the Violet Gold New Dao sect as compensation. Most of the resources that had belonged to the 2 sects were given to the Violet Gold New Dao sect as well. The remaining resources, such as the sect's buildings and lands, were all auctioned off. The profits from the auction were used to compensate the other sects who had been robbed. That marked the end of the entire fiasco. By the end of it, the political situation on the 5th mountain ring had transformed. Even though matters had ended peaceably, many people could tell that something had been amiss. They knew that the water refinement sect and the Thousand Spirit sect had been made the scapegoats. They had deserved their fair share of the blame, though, as they had participated in the robberies repeatedly. Of course, the decisive factor in the entire fiasco was the royal family. Without the 2 royal decrees, the matter wouldn't have been resolved as easily. What this fiasco showed was a subtle, brief clash between the royal family and the 3 main sects. Even without the royal family coming in and simplifying the matter, Wang Baoli wasn't worried at all. He could simply take on another person's identity. That would have solved all his problems. He had even chosen his next target. If that didn't work, he still had a trump card, he could return to his coffin. His coffin was so powerful that he wouldn't be worried even if a planet realm cultivator were to come looking for him. In fact, even though the royal family's involvement appeared to have resolved the matter, it had made things more complicated. The three main sects had locked down the galactic perimeter around the main Divine Eye planet. Every battleship that entered and exited the planet had to undergo a stringent inspection. They appeared to still be searching for the real culprit. On the other hand, they were also sending a warning to the royal family. What a headache! Wang Baoli sighed as he pulled his eyes away from the pale moon. He wasn't worried about his battleship's construction, as he had gathered all the materials that he required. Now, he only needed to put them together. However, the planet was currently on high alert, and the climate was rather sensitive. After some thought, Wang Baoli decided to pick another place to assemble his battleship. He was currently racking his brains over how to leave the planet. It's going to be difficult to leave without drawing any attention. Wang Baoli sighed again. His own observations, and what he had learned from the Grand Supreme Elder of the Holy Crest sect both pointed to how stringent the current lockdown on the planet was. The Violet Gold New Dao sect had even sent a Spirit Immortal Realm cultivator to the home planet for this very purpose. The Spirit Immortal Realm cultivator stood guard in space. His presence reinforced the lockdown and served to instill awe and fear in the sects. Wang Baoli wasn't confident that he could escape the planet without drawing the attention of this Spirit Immortal Realm cultivator. Unless... After a long bout of silence, Wang Baoli's eyes landed on the Holy Crest sect's battleship. It was mostly restored at this point, and its repairs would be completed soon. He fell into a deep contemplation. Then, light flickered in his eyes. In the days that followed, he set aside all thoughts of leaving. Instead, he worked alongside the other sect elders and gave his all as they completed the final battleship repairs. The days passed steadily. 2 months later, the lockdown remained in place. However, the Holy Crest sect's battleship had undergone a year's repairs, and after expending vast resources, it was finally completely restored. The day after the repairs were completed, the Grand Supreme Elder summoned everyone and made an announcement. Go back and prepare yourselves. In a week, we will take off and head for an extraterrestrial star system. We will commence resource acquisition. Wang Baoli's eyes lit up when he heard that. The other elders were equally excited. The Holy Crest sect had a hard year. Its disciples had tightened their belts and gone to the extent of almost starving themselves, watching as the sect emptied its store of resources, waiting for the day that they could finally go hunting. The order was met with fervent approval from Wang Baoli and the other elders. The entire sect was overwhelmed with excitement when news of this announcement spread. Wang Baoli had been waiting for this. He had analyzed the situation. The planet was currently under lockdown, with a Spirit Immortal Realm cultivator standing guard over the comings and goings of all battleships. It was impossible for him to leave the planet without detection. He needed a reason that was beyond reproach and a way to get out. No other reason was more perfect than a sect traveling to carry out its pirating ways. He hadn't chosen to defect to another sect. After analyzing the situation, he realized it would be safer if he stayed in one place instead of moving around. Besides, he had grown familiar with the Holy Crest sect. Making use of the Holy Crest sect to leave the planet was the safest solution. Once we're beyond the reach of the Spirit Immortal Realm cultivator's divine sense, I'll be able to leave immediately. I can then find a place to assemble my battleship. Then, it's back to the Federation, where I will become the Federation President. 7 days later, Wang Baoli stepped aboard the Holy Crest sect battleship alongside hordes of disciples, the other sect elders, and the Grand Supreme Elder. He felt the battleship rumble as it exuded waves of energy into space. Standing aboard the battleship, gazing at the world outside through a window, he was filled with both nervousness and excitement. I'm on my way home. Chapter 745, The Divine Eye. The Demonic Eye. Chapter 745, The Divine Eye. The Demonic Eye. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Wang Baoli was brimming with anticipation. It was then that he noticed that of the crew that was joining the raid, 70% of them were disciples planning to gather resources for their own use. The remaining members were cultivators who hadn't contributed much to the sect or cultivators who were mediocre. They were people whom the sect could do without. The fact that they were here surprised Wang Baoli. But he was going to leave soon, so he didn't pay much attention to that. His main focus was on preparing for the moment when he was going to conceal his presence. He wanted to minimize the chances of him being discovered. The Holy Crest sect battleship soon unleashed a burst of incredible speed. The sound of its engines rumbled in the air as it dashed into the atmosphere. The battleship cruised through the atmosphere, a fearsome beast roaring as it raced along. It only took half an hour for it to pass through the thick layer of the planet's atmosphere and emerge in space. Wang Baoli's eyes narrowed slightly. He could see the main Divine Eye planet orbiting in space. Drifting around the planet were hundreds of battleships that belonged to the three main sects, and each one of those battleships exuded incredible power. These were the battleships that kept the planet on lockdown. Behind the line of battleships floated an enormous meteor. To be more precise, it was a stronghold crafted from a meteor. The stronghold wasn't floating in space. It was being dragged along by an enormous, rainbow-colored jellyfish. The jellyfish exuded a bright glow and the aura of a perfected soul conduit realm cultivation. Waves of energy rippled outward, enveloping the area around the jellyfish. If one were to take a closer look, they might see an indistinct figure sitting cross-legged inside the jellyfish. There was no spirit energy coming off the person. Nevertheless, the sight of him would send anyone's heart racing with fear. It was the Spirit Immortal Realm Cultivator. Battleships that were entering and leaving the planet were split into two lanes. They flew past the rainbow-colored jellyfish in an orderly queue. As they went past, the jellyfish would emit rays of light that swept across the battleships. If the scan detected nothing out of the ordinary, the battleship would be allowed to pass. Wang Baoli's nervousness increased at the sight. He studied the scene in detail, then gradually relaxed. "It's going to be all right," Wang Baoli murmured to himself. He stole glances at the others around him and realized he wasn't the only person who was feeling nervous. The other elders looked jittery as well. Even the Grand Supreme Elder appeared subdued. Their reactions weren't due to guilt, it was a natural response, an instinctive fear and respect for the overwhelming power exhibited by a Spirit Immortal Realm Cultivator. Silence reigned in the battleship as it joined the queue to leave the planet. They waited 2 hours before their turn for inspection came. The battleship approached the jellyfish slowly. As the rainbow-colored light swept across the battleship, Wang Baoli could sense an extremely powerful spiritual presence enveloping him. All protections were stripped from his mind and his storage bags. Every thought in his mind and every item in his storage bags were exposed to the spiritual presence and its viewing. It was then that Wang Baoli's essence technique activated mysteriously. This essence technique had been a gift from Wang Baoli's senior brother, the man who was the first divine king of the never-ending clan, whom legend said had slain a divine emperor. The essence technique summoned an illusory form that deceived the eyes of the intrusive spiritual presence, only allowing it to see what Wang Baoli wanted it to see. Wang Baoli was a powerful cultivator, but he hadn't yet attained the soul conduit realm. Such deception only worked because the Spirit Immortal Realm Cultivator was only conducting a brief sweep. If the inspection were to be any more detailed, Wang Baoli wasn't confident that he could pass it without causing any suspicion. The scan took a dozen or so seconds, then they received notification that their departure was approved, which was met with sighs of relief. The Grand Supreme Elder steered the battleship slowly away from the jellyfish. The battleship's speed picked up gradually, and soon, it was racing towards outer space. "I have to be patient. We are still within the wide reach of the Spirit Immortal Realm Cultivator's divine sense. There are still dangers hidden in the Divine Eye civilization. It's best to act when we've left the Divine Eye star system." Wang Baoli looked like he always did, but his mind was furiously working out the details of his escape. He finally decided to play safe. He would wait for the battleship to leave the Divine Eye star system before he made his escape. His tightly strung nerves began to loosen as they left the main Divine Eye planet behind them. He thought about the looks that were going to be on his Grandmaster's and Du and Muke's faces when he finally returned to the Federation. The thought made him vibrate with anticipation. "Nothing in this world can stop me from becoming the Federation president." Wang Baoli thought excitedly before something caught his attention. There was something wrong with the course the battleship was taking. The position of the stars was different from what he remembered from the star maps. The battleship didn't seem to be headed for space beyond the Divine Eye star system. It appeared to be flying towards the star at the center of the star system. The discovery stunned Wang Baoli, and he wasn't the only one affected. Shock appeared on the faces of the other elders and a portion of the remaining cultivators. They all turned towards the Grand Supreme Elder, who was steering the battleship. One elder was about to raise a question when the Grand Supreme Elder suddenly pressed his fingers together in a hand seal, and slammed both palms onto the console. His cultivation erupted from his body and sent the battleship flying at full speed. A thunderous rumble resonated in space as the battleship raced towards the Eternal Star at a startling speed. It approached the Eternal Star rapidly. The battleship looked as if it were traveling at light speed, distorting and bending light itself as it tore through space. Alarm flashed across Wang Baoli's face, and a dark look flickered in his eyes. He had no idea what was going on, but it was clearly something bad. He narrowed his eyes, prepared to force his way out of the battleship as it drew nearer to the Eternal Star at an intense speed. It was then that his eyes suddenly widened. The demonic eye art nestled inside his body had chosen this moment to activate itself. It churned fiercely and wildly, with the violence of a feral beast, exuding an indescribable madness and hunger. The air behind Wang Baoli began to warp, his demonic eye on the verge of materializing. Wang Baoli was taken completely by surprise. He immediately suppressed the demonic eye and stopped it from materializing. However, the demonic eye art continued to churn inside his body. What's going on? Have I been discovered? Wang Baoli's breathing hitched as shock and alarm rose inside him. He could sense the demonic eye art's hunger, which intensified as the battleship approached the Eternal Star. The hunger began to affect Wang Baoli. He could sense something calling out to him from inside the Eternal Star. It was like a mother's call for her child. Every wandering child was irresistibly compelled to obey it and return to their mother's embrace. I haven't been discovered. This is something else. Wang Baoli thought, shaken. An incredulous thought appeared in his mind. At that exact moment, the indescribably gigantic Eternal Star, that had appeared before the approaching battleship suddenly let loose a surge of flames and energy waves. A sliver of a crack appeared on the Eternal Star, and it grew increasingly wider and longer. It took only a few seconds before the crack touched both ends of the Eternal Star. Then, like the lid covering an eye, it snapped open. Space itself thundered and quaked, and every cultivator on board the battleship could hear a loud buzzing in their head. Stunned, they stared ahead, at the gigantic eye the size of an Eternal Star. The eye's pupil was grey and devoid of emotion, appearing cold and without feeling while exuding a powerful aura. It was like a god gazing down upon its creations. It was gazing down at the steadily approaching battleship, which was like an ant when compared to the eye. Everyone in the battleship was blown away by the sight. No one noticed Wang Baoli's trembling body or the demonic eye art nestled inside him. The demonic eye art was now fully activated and churning furiously. Even this couldn't compare to the shock he was experiencing at this moment. There was no way he could remain calm. The eye that the Eternal Star had transformed into was almost exactly the same as the demonic eye that always materialized when he used the demonic eye art. The divine eye civilization, and the demonic eye art. Wang Baoli's heart was racing. In the next moment, the battleship was caught by the Eternal Star's gravity and yanked roughly towards it. The battleship began racing speedily towards the Eternal Star. Chapter 746, The Divine Eye Royalty. Chapter 746, The Divine Eye Royalty. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Everything happened too quickly. The eye that the Eternal Star had transformed into exuded a sudden, incredible suction force on the battleship, drawing it towards the Eternal Star. As the battleship headed for the Eternal Star, Wang Baoli finally recovered from his initial shock. He decided to abandon his original plan and suppress his desire to leave right now. He remembered that the demonic eye art he had chosen to practice was a killing art. It had been one of the cultivation techniques that he had found in the dark sect during his dark dream. The cultivation technique had been incomplete and could only be mastered until the nascent soul realm level. The dark sect wouldn't have valued such a divine power. After all, the sect had a vast collection of cultivation techniques. However, the demonic eye art's mysterious and demonic nature had differentiated it from the rest. The dark sect eventually modified the demonic eye art, which showed how unique and powerful the demonic eye art was. Wang Baoli remembered reading the footnotes written by a powerful dark sect cultivator in the records of the demonic eye art. He had lamented about the fact that their records stopped at the nascent soul realm. The divine eye civilization and the demonic eye art must share some kind of close connection. Maybe I'll be able to find the missing records for the cultivation technique here? Wang Baoli's eyes shone with an intense light. The battleship was approaching the eternal star, and the temperature was rising. A wisp of grey chi burst out of the eye that was the eternal star and enveloped the battleship, passing through its hull and encircling every cultivator on board. Wang Baoli's head began to buzz. He had no time to study the grey chi that was encircling his body. The battleship began to shake violently in the next moment. It charged ahead, at an indescribably fast speed, and entered the eternal star. Then, it vanished. Both the battleship and the cultivators on board disappeared. Time passed, perhaps eons, perhaps a mere moment. Wang Baoli awoke to waves of acute agony rippling through his body. His eyes were lined with blood, and his breathing was heavy and uneven. He wasn't the only one in pain. Everyone on the battleship, including the Grand Supreme Elder, was shaking. Many had even fallen to the floor due to the extreme agony they were experiencing. There were also dozens of cultivators who appeared unable to withstand whatever just happened. Perhaps something unexpected had occurred during the process, but their bodies exploded suddenly, blood and flesh splattering on the walls and floor of the battleship. The Grand Supreme Elder seemed to release a sigh of relief then. His raspy voice entered everyone's ears. "Fellow cultivators, please do not blame me. The Holy Crest sect has reached a point where we have to place everything we've got on a single bet. I've mortgaged the entire sect and its assets in exchange for an opportunity to activate one of the two mystic techniques that belong to the Divine Eye royal family, the Eye of 10,000 Demons." Doubt and suspicion colored everyone's faces when they heard what the Grand Supreme Elder had said. Cultivators at lower cultivation realms looked pale, the terror on their faces clear for all to see. The looks on the nascent soul realm elders' faces were dark as well. They stared at the world outside the battleship, solemnity coloring their eyes. Then, they looked at one another. Finally, the elder with the longest length of service in the sect spoke. "Grand Supreme Elder, this is an extremely important matter. You should have told us earlier that you were going to do this." Wang Baoli narrowed his eyes. As he tried to catch his breath, he lifted his head and stared at the cosmos through the battleship's windows. He wasn't bothered by the Grand Supreme Elder's mortgaging of the sect and its assets. There were three things that caught his attention. The first was the royal family, the second, the two powerful mystic techniques, and the third, the Eye of 10,000 Demons. So, the royal family. Wang Baoli fell into contemplation. His eyes flashed when he studied the cosmos again. He could no longer see the Divine Eye civilization and its eternal star. What he saw might be an eternal star as well, but it was significantly smaller. It gave off a dim light, as if it were on the way to being extinguished. This was no longer the Divine Eye civilization. Teleportation across star systems? Wang Baoli suddenly understood what the Grand Supreme Elder had meant when he had spoken about activating the Eye of 10,000 Demons. It was to perform advanced teleportation. Wang Baoli continued his musing, retracting his gaze and, instead, studying the grey mist surrounding his body. The mist hadn't disappeared after the teleportation, it continued to encircle everyone on board the battleship. However, it was so faint that no one would notice it if they didn't pay attention. Wang Baoli had noticed it, but only because the demonic eye art inside his body had activated, and given off waves of hunger that spoke of its desire to consume the grey mist. Perhaps it was because they were now miles away from the Divine Eye civilization, but Wang Baoli could finally suppress the demonic eye art's hunger. He thought about the eternal star's mysterious transformation into an eye. He still had no idea what had actually happened after that. As a result, Wang Baoli decided to play it safe and not act rashly. He turned and looked at the Grand Supreme Elder, who was being questioned by the elders. The Grand Supreme Elder took a deep breath, and a fierce glint flashed in his eyes. "So, telling you now is considered too late?" The elder with the longest length of service in the sect fell silent. The other elders kept their silence as well, including Wang Baoli. The Grand Supreme Elder had a solemn expression on his face as his eyes swept across every elder, including Wang Baoli. Then, he started to speak in a slow, serious manner. There's no need for me to explain to all of you in detail the current state that the sect is in. You should know better than anyone. An extraterrestrial raid is hardly a simple matter. All safe star systems in the vicinity of the Divine Eye civilization have been robbed clean, meaning there isn't much left for us there. This wouldn't have been a problem in the past, but the Holy Crest sect is in dire straits now. In order to reverse our fortunes, we need to bring back a rich bounty. Rather than striving for mere survival, we should just wing it. That is why I've mortgaged our sect in exchange for a chance to activate the Eye of 10,000 Demons. We have the right to make a two-way teleportation and teleport to an unknown part of the cosmos, one that is far away from the Divine Eye civilization. I'm going to be honest with everyone, I don't plan to return if we fail, and I'll be taking the battleship. As for the rest of you, you'll have to come up with sufficient resources to exchange for teleportation back to the Divine Eye civilization using the Eye of 10,000 Demons. That's all I have to say. Please, think this through carefully. The Grand Supreme Elder gave Wang Baoli and the other elders a long, meaningful look after he was done speaking. Then, he turned and entered the training chamber. He knew that what he had done was going to create mass panic, but he didn't care. In order to avoid any unnecessary drama and violence, he knew that he had to give the others some time to digest what he had just told them and come to terms with their current circumstances. A commotion broke out amongst the cultivators as soon as the Grand Supreme Elder left. Everyone began discussing things heatedly. The eyes of a few elders had even turned red with anger, but there was nothing they could do. The power to activate the teleportation that would send them back was with the person who had purchased said right. They had to either acquire sufficient resources to buy their passage back home or kill the Grand Supreme Elder, and snatch the right to activate the teleportation from him. There was no other way to return to their home planet. Of course, the Grand Supreme Elder's words might have been blunt, but they were true. If the Holy Crest sect didn't return with a huge bounty to replenish its stores, the sect wouldn't survive for long. That was why, it might be better to just risk everything and wing it. In Wang Baoli's view, the Grand Supreme Elder was, without doubt, a ruthless character. He recalled the near imperceptible grey mist he could see around everyone and came to a conclusion about what it was. It must be a mark of the Eye of 10,000 Demons that was going to bring them home. It seems that the Eye of 10,000 Demons can allow a person to travel extremely long distances. Its seal can also bring someone directly back to the Divine Eye civilization. So, is this a two-way teleportation array formation? Wang Baoli was slightly confounded. This was completely different from the demonic eye art that he was practicing. He wasn't panicking though. With a calm expression on his face, he began talking with a few elders standing next to him. He was going to find out more about the royal family and the Eye of 10,000 Demons. Everyone was currently experiencing a myriad of feelings over what had just happened. What Wang Baoli was asking wasn't any secret. In fact, the elders were surprised by his ignorance on the matter before they recalled that he had just been promoted to the position of an elder. Distracted by their own emotions, the elders didn't think too much about Wang Baoli's questions, and the latter soon got the answers he needed. The royal family and the three main sects might appear to coexist peacefully in the Divine Eye civilization, but in reality, the tensions between the two groups ran deep. The royal family was unwilling to just stand by and watch as it was replaced by the three main sects. However, it couldn't reclaim the power it had granted the sects, and it had no power to retaliate against them. The royal family was struggling and barely surviving. The sects wanted to remove the royal family from the picture altogether, but due to certain reasons unknown to the rest, they couldn't. The instrument that allowed the royal family to survive to this day, the same instrument that prevented the sects from wiping the royal family out completely, was the two great mystic techniques that belonged to the royal family. The elders had no idea what the first mystic technique was. They had only heard legends of this mystic technique and how it could strike fear into the heart of a planet realm cultivator. It could only be mastered by the royal family, so outsiders would find it difficult to steal the mystic technique for their own. The second mystic technique was the Eye of 10,000 Demons. The royal family was the owner of the mystic technique, and certain unique reasons ensured that ownership couldn't be transferred to someone outside the royal family. It appeared to have something to do with the royal bloodline. User rights, on the other hand, were a completely different matter. The current political climate in the Divine Eye civilization meant that the royal family could no longer monopolize the rights to the mystic technique. The three main sects had taken over the rights to use the mystic technique. Interesting. A ghostly light flickered in Wang Baoli's eyes as he learned what he needed to know. He thought about how the demonic eye art had helped in strengthening his cultivation to nearly freakish levels, and the thought of obtaining the royal family's mystic technique surfaced in his mind. There's no rush in leaving the Divine Eye civilization. There's a high chance that the royal family owns a more advanced demonic eye art. Chapter 747, A Mutant Civilization. Chapter 747, A Mutant Civilization. As Wang Baoli considered the situation while exchanging opinions with the other elders periodically, the 7 elders of the Holy Crest sect quickly came to an agreement. There was already no way to change the current situation. That being the case, they decided to make use of this opportunity to steal as much as possible. If they stole enough, the Holy Crest sect might really be able to reverse their situation and resolve their financial crisis. At the same time, if their spoils didn't fulfill the requirements, then they would still have to get the resources needed to exchange for the mandate to return from the Grand Supreme Elder. As for those core formation realm cultivators, their thoughts were no longer important. Very quickly, after the 7 of them reached a consensus, they immediately greeted the Grand Supreme Elder respectfully and expressed their attitude. The Grand Supreme Elder of the Holy Crest sect laughed and ignored the core formation realm cultivators as well, instead letting Wang Baoli and the others assist him in operating the Holy Crest sect battleship together. Unleashing its maximum speed, the battleship exploded into the cosmos ahead. To the Divine Eye civilization, this cosmos was much darker visually. However, the sense of foreignness was the same for Wang Baoli and the others. Even the Grand Supreme Elder of the Holy Crest sect hadn't been here before. He had previously mortgaged the sect in exchange for the right to open the Eye of 10,000 Demons. However, he had to choose a general distance for long-distance teleportation because he didn't have the accurate coordinates. As such, he only knew that this star domain had never been visited by the Divine Eye civilization before. Even he couldn't confirm whether they would be able to find a civilization and resources to pillage. In this uncertainty, if one imagined the cosmos to be a black ocean, then the Holy Crest sect's battleship was like a lone boat silently moving forward within it. Time also slowly passed in the process, and 3 months elapsed in a flash. In these 3 months, the low-ranked cultivators of the Holy Crest sect had accepted their fate and become silent. But the vicious glints flashing across their eyes at times were like those of hungry wolves. One could imagine that they, who had nowhere else to go, would definitely unleash a viciousness previously unseen if they were to find edible prey. As for Wang Baoli and company, they looked a lot calmer than the low-ranked cultivators. However, Wang Baoli noticed that the ominous air around the other elders of the nascent soul realm was getting stronger. Even the Grand Supreme Elder, who was trying extremely hard to hide his thoughts, couldn't escape the observation of Wang Baoli. He could see that the Grand Supreme Elder was getting increasingly anxious. Only Wang Baoli wasn't restless. On the one hand, if he wanted to leave, he could do so at any time. On the other hand, he didn't have the mandate to use the Eye of 10,000 Demons seal to return to the Divine Eye civilization, though he could get it very easily. So to him, not only did he have no feelings of anxiousness, he had even gained a deeper understanding of the royal family, the 3 main sects, and the history of the Divine Eye civilization through his many conversations with the different elders in this period of time. After a period of time, if it remains like this, I'll have no choice but to act. Wang Baoli narrowed his eyes, his gaze sweeping towards the people around him. He took another look at the Grand Supreme Elder, who had a gloomy expression and relaxedly gazed at the pitch-black cosmos outside. But as he gazed, Wang Baoli's pupils suddenly constricted. Almost in the same moment that Wang Baoli's pupils constricted, the battleship, which the Holy Crest sect put a lot of effort into repairing, noticed something amiss in the distant cosmos and sounded an alarm. As the sound of the alarm echoed, all of the cultivators in the battleship shuddered, and their breathing quickened. That was especially so for the Grand Supreme Elder and the other cultivators at the nascent soul realm. All of them stared, and a glimmer flashed across the Grand Supreme Elder's eyes as he took out a crystal compass with a flick of his hand. This crystal compass wasn't big, and it released gentle waves of light as it floated in the Grand Supreme Elder's hand. When he activated a hand seal with his left hand and pointed, the light immediately became brighter. As it grew extremely resplendent, a buzz echoed around the surroundings. It was as though an invisible hand was holding a transparent pen and sketching a star map in mid-air. When the star map appeared, it immediately caught the eyes of everyone in the battleship. The first to appear was an eternal star that seemed to be almost dead. Next, 6 planets of different sizes appeared around it. The dying eternal star had no color, while 2 of the 6 planets surrounding it were black. 3 of the planets were shifting between green and yellow but leaning towards green.